Welcome. Before we begin tonight's story, I have one question. Where are you listening from tonight? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy falling asleep to these calm but chilling tales, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, close your eyes and let the forest take you. The day I got the call about June Callahan was the kind of day that made you question whether you were cut out for this job. It wasn't the people involved. God knows they were bad enough. It was how ordinary everything started out. That's the thing about being a park ranger in the Badlands. The worst days always start out like any other. My name is Wyatt Cormack, and I've been working as a park ranger for the National Park Service for over 7 years. 5 of those years were spent at Badlands National Park in South Dakota. If you've never been here before, let me describe it. This isn't Yellowstone or Yosemite. There are no tall pine trees or waterfalls. The Badlands, as the name suggests, has a harsh, unforgiving landscape. Eroded hills, jagged rock formations, and towers look as if they were carved by a blind knife wielded by an angry god. The formations out here are striped in bands of red, yellow, and gray sediment, stacked like some kind of geological layer cake that tells the story of 75 million years. It's beautiful in its own way, I suppose, but it's a hostile kind of beauty. The kind that reminds you constantly that nature doesn't give a damn about you or your survival. During the summer months, temperatures can hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground bakes, the air shimmers with heat waves, and if you're not careful, dehydration will sneak up on you faster than you'd think. Come winter, that same landscape becomes a frozen hellscape where wind chills can drop well below zero. The wind out here is relentless year-round, a constant, howling presence that gets into your head after a while. But it was late September when this all happened, so we were in that sweet spot between the extremes. Daytime temperatures were in the low 70s, nighttime dropping into the 40s. Perfect hiking weather, which meant we were still getting a decent number of visitors despite the season winding down. I'd started my shift at 6 that morning, same as always. Coffee from the ranger station. Terrible stuff that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the Roosevelt administration. But it did the job. I checked the weather report. Clear skies, light winds, no precipitation expected. Standard patrol duties for the day. Check in at the visitor center, drive the loop road, make sure nobody was doing anything stupid like trying to climb the formations or getting too close to the bison. Yeah, we've got bison out here. About 1,000 of them, and they're not the docile, slow-moving creatures people seem to think they are. Every year, we get tourists who want to take selfies with them, and every year we have to explain that a 2,000-pound animal can outrun you, outmaneuver you, and turn you into a smear on the prairie without breaking a sweat. The morning went smoothly enough. I radioed in to dispatch around 9, confirmed that all the main trails were clear, and helped a family from Minnesota whose rental car had overheated near the Pinnacle's overlook. By noon, I was thinking it might actually be a quiet day. That's when I should have known better. The call came through around 12:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was eating lunch in my patrol vehicle, parked at the Castle Trail trailhead, and I'd just checked my watch thinking I should probably finish up and get back to my rounds. Ranger Cormack, this is dispatch. We've got a report of a possible missing hiker. Can you respond? The voice belonged to Sarah Brennan, one of our veteran dispatchers. She'd been doing this job for longer than I'd been a ranger, and I could hear something in her tone that made me sit up straighter. I grabbed the radio. This is Cormack. Go ahead with details. We've got a male caller, says his wife went out on the Saddle Pass Trail this morning around 8 a.m. for what was supposed to be a short hike. She hasn't returned and isn't answering her cell phone. He's at the trailhead now, pretty anxious. I glanced at my map. Saddle Pass Trail wasn't far from where I was, maybe 10 minutes by vehicle. It's one of the more challenging hikes in the park, a steep quarter-mile ascent that gains 200 feet of elevation. Most people knock it out in about an hour round trip, but it's not uncommon for hikers to extend their time up there, exploring the formations or just taking in the view. Still, if she'd left at 8 and it was now almost 1, that was pushing 5 hours. Even accounting for someone taking their time, that was longer than normal. Roger that, dispatch. I'm about 10 minutes out. Can you get me a description and any other relevant details? Stand by. There was a pause, and I could hear Sarah talking to someone in the background. Then she came back on. Hiker's name is June Callahan, age 34, 5'6", brown hair, last seen wearing a blue windbreaker, black hiking pants, and gray trail runners. Husband says she's an experienced hiker, been doing this for years. He stayed behind because of a knee injury. Says she took a day pack with water and snacks, told him she'd be back by 11 at the latest. I fired up the engine and pulled out of the Castle Trail parking area, heading east on the loop road. The Badlands stretched out on either side of me, all those twisted formations casting long shadows despite the midday sun. The sky was that deep, endless blue you only get in places with low humidity and high altitude. Any chance she just changed her plans? Decided to do a longer hike? I asked, though I was already mentally preparing for a search. Husband says no. Says she's very punctual, always checks in when she says she will. He's tried calling her cell multiple times, no answer. He also says... Sarah hesitated, and that hesitation made my gut tighten. He says she mentioned something this morning about seeing something odd on one of the formations yesterday. Wanted to go back and check it out. Odd how? He wasn't specific. Just said she seemed curious about it, maybe a little unsettled. He didn't think much of it at the time. Great, because what every missing person case needs is a vague sense of foreboding to start things off. I've been doing this job long enough to know that 9 times out of 10, there's a perfectly rational explanation. Hiker takes a wrong turn, gets turned around, spends a few hours finding their way back. Cell phone dies. Someone underestimates the difficulty of the terrain and takes longer than expected. It usually ends with a relieved reunion and maybe some mild embarrassment. But that 1 time out of 10? That's what keeps you up at night. I reached the Saddle Pass trailhead in just under 10 minutes, pulling into the small gravel parking area where 3 other vehicles sat baking in the sun. A man was pacing near a blue sedan, phone pressed to his ear. He looked to be in his late 30s, athletic build, wearing cargo shorts and a polo shirt. The moment he saw my Ranger vehicle pull up, he ended his call and hurried over. "Thank God," he said as I stepped out. "Are you the Ranger? My wife, June. She's still out there." "I know something's wrong. She would have been back by now." Up close, I could see the worry etched into his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had that jittery energy people get when adrenaline and fear are competing for control. I've seen it before, and the first rule is to stay calm and project confidence, even if you're feeling anything but. "Mr. Callahan, I'm Ranger Cormac. I understand your wife went out on Saddle Pass this morning and hasn't returned. I need to ask you some questions, and then I'm going to head up the trail to look for her, all right?" He nodded rapidly. Yes, anything. Just, please. She's been gone too long. June's not careless. She knows these places. We've hiked all over the country, and she's never... His voice cracked, and he took a breath. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." I pulled out my notebook. "I need you to tell me exactly what time she left, what route she said she was taking, and what her state of mind was. Can you do that?" He ran a hand through his hair. "She left around 8, maybe 8:05. We got here early because she wanted to beat the heat and the crowds. She was planning to just do the main Saddle Pass trail up to the ridge, maybe poke around the formations at the top for a bit. She had her day pack, Water bottles, some trail mix, her phone. She was wearing her blue windbreaker, black hiking pants, gray shoes. And you said she mentioned seeing something yesterday. His expression shifted, became uncertain. Yeah, we hiked the Notch Trail yesterday afternoon. On the way back, she kept looking at one of the formations off to the side. When I asked her what she was looking at, she said she thought she saw something moving up on one of the higher ridges. I looked, but didn't see anything. Could have been a bird, or shadows, or just the way the light was hitting the rock. She kind of laughed it off, but I could tell it stuck with her. Did she say she was going to investigate it today? Not directly, but this morning, when she was getting ready, she mentioned wanting to check out that ridge from yesterday. I thought she just meant she wanted a better view of it or something. I didn't think. He trailed off, guilt mixing with the worry in his eyes. I wrote all of this down, keeping my expression neutral. Mr. Callahan, has June ever had any health issues? Dizzy spells? Heart problems? Anything like that? No, nothing. She's in great shape. Runs marathons. This kind of hike is nothing for her. And her mental state? Has she been depressed, anxious, anything unusual? He shook his head firmly. No. We're on vacation. Having a great time. This is our anniversary trip. June loves hiking, loves being outdoors. There's no way she would... He stopped, realizing what I was asking. No, absolutely not. She wouldn't hurt herself. That's not what this is. I nodded. I have to ask, you understand. Now, you said you stayed behind because of a knee injury. He gestured to his left leg. Tweaked it on the Notch Trail yesterday. Nothing serious, just sore. June told me to rest it, that she'd do a quick solo hike and be back before lunch. She wanted to let me sleep in a bit. The guilt in his voice was thick now. I should have gone with her. I should have... Mr. Callahan, I interrupted gently. Right now, the best thing you can do is stay here in case she comes back. I'm going to head up the trail and see if I can find her. I've got a radio, and I'll check in regularly. Do you have a recent photo of June I can take with me? He fumbled with his phone, pulled up a picture. It showed a woman with the shoulder-length brown hair, a bright smile, and warm eyes. She was standing in front of one of the Badlands formations, the morning light painting everything in shades of orange and gold. She looked healthy, happy, alive. I took the photo with my own phone. Thank you. Now, I need you to stay by your vehicle. If she comes back, you call dispatch immediately. Here's the number. I handed him one of our cards. Don't go looking for her yourself. Let us do our job. Understood? He looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. Just find her, please. I'll do everything I can, I told him, and I meant it. I went back to my vehicle and grabbed my search pack. Extra water, first aid kit, rope, emergency beacon, and a handheld GPS unit. I also clipped my radio to my belt and made sure it was on the right channel. Then I radioed dispatch. Dispatch, this is Ranger Cormac. I'm at Saddle Pass Trailhead, about to begin search for missing hiker June Callahan. Husband confirms last seen around 0800 hours, expected return by 1100. Current time is 1310 hours. Requesting you log this and have a backup ranger on standby in case I need additional support. Copy that, Ranger Cormac, Sarah's voice came back. Logged and noted. Ranger Mitchell is in the area and has been advised. Keep us updated. Will do. Cormac out. I looked at the trailhead. The Saddle Pass Trail starts innocently enough. A worn, dirt path that winds through a small prairie section before beginning its steep ascent up the side of a formation. From where I stood, I could see the trail zigzagging up the eroded slope, a thin line carved into the striated rock. The sun was brutal even now in late September, and I could feel the heat radiating off the ground. I took a long drink from my water bottle, adjusted my hat, and started walking. The first quarter mile was easy enough. The trail was well maintained, clearly marked, and I didn't see anything immediately concerning. No signs of disturbance, no dropped items, nothing to indicate someone had gotten into trouble. I kept my eyes on the ground, looking for footprints in the dusty sections of trail. There were plenty of them. This was a popular hike. But I was looking for a specific pattern. Gray trail runners, size 7 or 8 based on June's height and build. And there, in a patch of fine dust about 50 yards up the trail, I found them. Fresh prints, probably from this morning. The tread pattern was distinct, and the prints were heading up the trail. I followed them, my pace steady but deliberate. The trail began to climb more steeply, and I could feel my heart rate pick up, partly from the exertion, partly from the growing sense that something wasn't right. The prints continued, sometimes clear in the dust, sometimes vanishing when the trail crossed solid rock. About halfway up the main ascent, I noticed something. The prints veered off the main trail, heading toward a narrow gap between two rock formations. I stopped, frowning. This wasn't the standard route. The main trail continued straight up to the ridge, but these prints were going sideways. I followed them to the gap. It was barely 3 feet wide, a natural crevice between two towering walls of striated rock. The walls rose at least 40 feet on either side, and the gap itself seemed to extend back into the formation, curving out of sight. This was not a maintained trail. This was not somewhere hikers were supposed to go. And yet there were June's footprints, leading straight into it. I radioed dispatch. "Dispatch, Cormac, I've located footprints matching our missing hiker's description. They've diverged from the main Saddle Pass trail approximately halfway up the ascent, heading into an unmaintained gap between formations. I'm going to follow and investigate." "Copy, Ranger Cormac. Please exercise caution and update every 15 minutes. Understood. Cormac out." I took a breath and entered the gap. The temperature dropped immediately, the rock walls blocking the sun, and the wind that had been constant out on the open trail disappeared, leaving an eerie stillness. My footsteps echoed slightly in the confined space, and I could hear my own breathing louder than I liked. The gap twisted and turned, sometimes widening to allow easy passage, sometimes narrowing so much I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. June's footprints continued ahead of me, clear in the accumulated dust on the ground. She'd definitely come this way, and recently. But why? What had she seen that made her leave the main trail and venture into this claustrophobic maze? After about 50 yards, the gap opened up into a small enclosed basin. It was roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across, with rock walls rising on all sides. The floor was relatively flat, covered in loose rock and gravel, and there, in the center of the basin, was June's day pack. I hurried over to it, my pulse quickening. The pack was unzipped, lying on its side. I checked the contents: 2 water bottles, 1 empty and 1 half full. A Ziploc bag of trail mix unopened. A small first aid kit. Her phone, battery dead. But no June. "June Callahan," I called out, my voice echoing off the rock walls. "June, this is Park Ranger Wyatt Cormac. Can you hear me?" Nothing. Just the echo of my own voice fading into silence. I looked around the basin more carefully. The walls were steep but not impossible to climb, especially for an experienced hiker. My eyes traced up the formations, looking for any sign of movement, any indication of where she might have gone. And then I saw it. About 20 feet up the western wall, there was a narrow ledge, and on that ledge, partially hidden by an overhang, was something blue, her windbreaker. My stomach dropped. I moved to the base of the wall and looked up, trying to figure out how she'd gotten up there. The rock face was rough, with plenty of handholds and footholds, but it was still a dangerous climb without proper equipment. And if she'd fallen, I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Cormac. I've found the missing hiker's pack and jacket. Location is in an enclosed basin accessed via an unmaintained gap off the main Saddle Pass Trail. I'm going to attempt to climb up to a ledge to check for signs of the hiker. Stand by." "Copy, Ranger Cormac. We're alerting search and rescue to your location. Please do not take unnecessary risks. Understood." I secured my radio and began to climb. The rock was solid beneath my hands, and I moved carefully, testing each hold before committing my weight to it. It was slow going, but after a few minutes I pulled myself up onto the ledge. The ledge was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, and the overhang made it feel even more claustrophobic. June's windbreaker was there, neatly folded and placed against the back wall. Next to it was one of her gray trail runners. Just one. I picked up the shoe, examining it. The sole was partially torn away from the upper, a clean separation that looked like it had been ripped off rather than worn through. The rubber sole itself was intact, but it was no longer attached to the shoe. What the hell had happened here? I looked around the ledge more carefully. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no indication that she'd been injured. But why would she take off her jacket? Why would her shoe be damaged like this? And where was she? I leaned over the edge of the ledge, looking down into the basin below, and then I looked to the sides. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. The ledge didn't end here. It continued, wrapping around the formation, hidden from view by the overhang. I moved carefully along the ledge, my back pressed against the rock wall, my heart hammering in my chest. The ledge narrowed even further, and I had to shuffle sideways, my toes hanging over the edge. And then the ledge curved around the formation, and I saw where it led. There was a second basin on the other side, smaller than the first, maybe 15 feet across. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the basin itself. It was what was at the edge of it. The ground ended abruptly in a sheer drop. I couldn't see the bottom from where I was, but I could tell it was deep, at least 60 or 70 feet down into a narrow ravine that cut between the formations. And at the very edge of that drop, partially obscured by loose rock and gravel, I could see the other gray trail runner. This one still had its sole attached, but there was no sign of June Callahan. I stood on that narrow ledge for what felt like an eternity, staring at that shoe sitting at the edge of the precipice. My mind was racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had June fallen? Had she gotten too close to the edge and lost her footing? But if she'd fallen, why was her shoe sitting there so neatly like it had been placed rather than lost in a tumble? And why the hell was one shoe missing its sole? I needed to get down there. I needed to see what was at the bottom of that ravine, even though every instinct I had was screaming that I wasn't going to like what I found. I carefully made my way back along the ledge to the first basin, my legs shaking from more than just the physical exertion. Once I was back on solid ground, I immediately radioed dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Cormac. Situation is escalating. I found evidence that suggests the missing hiker may have fallen from a significant height. I need search and rescue here immediately, and we're going to need technical climbing equipment and possibly a medical evacuation team on standby." Sarah's voice came back, stripped of its usual calm professionalism. "Copy that, Ranger Cormac. SAR is en route. ETA 20 minutes. What's your exact location?" I pulled out my GPS unit and read off the coordinates. "I'm in an unmaintained area accessed via a gap in the formations approximately halfway up the Saddle Pass Trail. There's a ravine here, estimated 60 to 70 feet deep. I need to access the bottom to confirm whether the hiker has fallen." "Negative, Ranger Cormac. Hold position and wait for SAR. Do not attempt a descent without proper equipment." I looked at the shoe sitting at the edge of that drop, then at my watch. It was now past 2 in the afternoon. If June had fallen this morning, she'd been down there for hours. Every minute mattered. Dispatch, with all due respect, if she's injured and has been down there since this morning, time is critical. I'm going to find a safe route down. There was a pause, then, Ranger Cormac, I am officially advising against this course of action. If you proceed, do so with extreme caution. We have your coordinates and will direct SAR to your location. Understood. Cormac out. I knew I was probably making a mistake. Protocol exists for a reason, and one of those reasons is to prevent rangers from becoming casualties themselves. But I also knew that if June Callahan was alive down there, barely clinging on, waiting for SAR could mean the difference between a rescue and a recovery. I examined the ravine more carefully from the edge of the basin. The walls were steep, but not quite vertical in most places. There were enough irregularities in the rock face that I thought I could make a careful descent without ropes, though it would be slow and dangerous. I double-checked my gear. I had about 50 feet of rope in my pack, not enough to rappel, but enough to secure myself for the riskiest sections. I also had my first aid kit, water, and my radio. I took a long drink, said a quick prayer to whoever might be listening, and began my descent. The first 20 feet weren't too bad. I found good handholds and footholds, moving methodically, never rushing. I'd done some recreational climbing back in Colorado before transferring to the Badlands, and muscle memory kicked in. Test the hold, shift your weight, move one limb at a time. Keep 3 points of contact. But as I descended deeper into the ravine, the rock became smoother, more difficult to grip. The walls began to close in, and the sunlight became increasingly filtered, leaving me in a dimness that made it hard to see where to place my hands and feet. About 40 feet down, I reached a section where the wall became nearly vertical for about 10 feet. There was no way I could free climb it. I found a solid outcropping of rock, secured my rope around it, and used it to lower myself down the vertical section. The rope burned against my palms, even through my gloves, and I could feel my arms trembling with the strain. Finally, my feet touched something solid. I'd reached the bottom. The ravine floor was narrow, no more than 6 or 7 feet wide, and littered with loose rock and debris that had fallen from above over the years. The walls rose up on both sides of me, creating a claustrophobic corridor that seemed to swallow sound. It was significantly cooler down here, and I could feel moisture in the air, probably from water that collected here during rare rainstorms. I looked around carefully, my eyes adjusting to the dimness. The ravine extended in both directions, curving out of sight. I moved slowly, scanning the ground for any sign of June. I found it about 20 feet to my right. At first, I thought it was just a pile of clothing or a discarded sleeping bag. But as I got closer, my stomach clenched with the realization of what I was seeing. It was June Callahan. She was lying on her side, partially covered by loose rock and gravel, her body wedged between 2 larger boulders. She wasn't moving. I rushed over, my training kicking in automatically. June, can you hear me? My name is Wyatt. I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help you. No response. I reached her side and immediately checked for a pulse. My fingers pressed against her neck, searching for the carotid artery. Nothing. I tried her wrist, still nothing. No. I checked for breathing, leaning close to her face, watching for any rise and fall of her chest. Nothing. Her skin was cool to the touch and her lips had a bluish tint. I began CPR immediately, even though I knew in my gut it was too late. I tilted her head back, checked her airway, and started the chest compressions. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. I kept going, kept trying because that's what you do. You don't give up, you never give up. But after 5 minutes, I had to accept what my body had already known. June. Callahan was dead. I sat back on my heels, breathing hard, my hands still trembling from the compressions. I looked at her more carefully now, trying to assess what had happened. She was lying on her side in an almost fetal position. Her black hiking pants were torn at the knees, and I could see abrasions on her exposed skin. Her hands were scraped and bloody, like she'd tried to catch herself during the fall. But what struck me as odd was her face. Despite everything else, her face had no visible injuries. No cuts, no bruises, nothing. It was as if she'd protected her face during the fall but let the rest of her body take the impact. I radioed dispatch, my voice hollow. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Cormac. I've located June Callahan at the bottom of the ravine. She's deceased." I performed CPR but was unable to revive her. "I'm going to need the medical examiner and a recovery team." Sarah's response was quiet, professional. "Copy that, Ranger Cormac. I'm so sorry. SAR is 3 minutes out. Hold your position and wait for them to reach you." "Understood." I sat there next to June's body, the weight of failure pressing down on me. This was what I'd feared when I'd started up that trail. This was the 1 in 10 outcome that haunts you. A woman had come out for a simple morning hike, and now she was dead. Her husband was up at the trailhead, waiting, hoping, and soon I'd have to tell him that she wasn't coming back. But as I sat there, something began to bother me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first, but there was something wrong with the scene. Something that didn't add up. I looked up at the ravine walls, tracing the path she would have fallen. It was a straight drop, maybe 65 feet. Fatal, certainly, but people had survived falls from that height before. And the way her body was positioned, wedged between the boulders, it almost looked like she'd been placed there rather than fallen. No, that was ridiculous. Shock was making me think crazy thoughts. Of course she'd fallen. The shoe at the edge of the cliff, the torn clothing, the abrasions, it all pointed to a tragic accident. But then I noticed something else. June's remaining shoe, the one still on her foot, had its sole intact. I looked around the immediate area and spotted the sole from her other shoe about 10 feet away, partially buried under loose gravel. I crawled over to it and picked it up, examining it closely. The sole was completely separated from the shoe, but the rubber itself was undamaged. No cuts, no tears, no signs of wear that would explain why it had come off. It was as if something had simply pulled it away from the shoe. I turned it over in my hands, and that's when I saw them. Scratches. Deep, parallel scratches in the rubber, like something with claws had gripped it. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. No, that didn't make sense. Those scratches could have come from anything, sharp rocks during the fall, debris in the ravine. I was letting the isolation and the tragedy get to me, seeing patterns where there were none. I heard voices echoing from above. The SAR team had arrived. "Down here," I called up. "I'm at the bottom of the ravine." Within minutes, 3 members of the SAR team had descended into the ravine using proper climbing equipment. One of them was Tom Patterson, a veteran ranger I'd worked with before. He took one look at June's body and then at me, his expression grim. "You okay, Cormac?" he asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. Found her like this. Performed a CPR, but she'd already been gone for a while. Looks like she fell from up there. I pointed toward the top of the ravine. Tom examined the body carefully, his movements practiced and respectful. The other 2 SAR members began setting up equipment to lift June's body out of the ravine. "What the hell was she doing off-trail?" Tom muttered, more to himself than to me. Husband said she mentioned seeing something yesterday on a different trail. Wanted to check it out. Tom looked at me. Seeing what? He didn't know. Something moving on one of the formations. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Cormac, how long have you been stationed here?" "5 years. Why?" "You ever hear about the other one?" "Other what?" He glanced at the other SAR members, then lowered his voice. "About 6 years ago, before you got here, there was another hiker who went off trail in this same area. Young guy, early 20s. They found him at the bottom of a ravine, too. A similar situation. Experienced hiker. No reason to go off trail, but he did. They found him with his boots torn up, soles separated just like this." He gestured to June's shoe. I felt my mouth go dry. "What happened?" "Official report said he fell. Accidental death. But the rangers who found him, they said there was something off about it. The positioning of the body, the damage to his gear, some of them thought—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Never mind, it's probably nothing. Coincidence." "What did they think, Tom?" He met my eyes. "They thought something chased him to that edge, something that wanted him to fall." Before I could respond, one of the other SAR members called out, "Hey, you guys need to see this." We moved over to where he was standing, about 15 feet down the ravine corridor. He was pointing at the rock wall. There, scratched into the soft sedimentary stone, were marks. They were deep, deliberate, and formed a pattern. They looked like tally marks, 4 vertical lines with a diagonal slash through them. 5. Then another set, and another, 15 marks total. "What the hell is that?" I asked. Tom's face had gone pale. "I don't know, but I don't like it." The SAR member who'd found the marks, I think his name was Rodriguez, reached out to touch them, then seemed to think better of it. "These are fresh. Within the last few days, maybe." "Could the victim have made them?" I asked. Tom examined the marks more closely. "Wrong height. These are about 6 feet up. June Callahan was 5'6". She'd have to be reaching up to make these, and given her injuries, I don't think she'd be in any condition to be carving tally marks after her fall." We all stood there in silence, the implications hanging heavy in the cool air of the ravine. Finally, Tom keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is SAR Team Leader Patterson. We've found some anomalous markings at the scene. I'm going to need someone to photograph and document everything down here before we move the body. And I think we should probably expand the search area. Make sure there's no one else down here." As the SAR team went to work, I found myself looking at those tally marks again, counting and recounting them. 15. What did they mean? 15 days? 15 hours? 15 what? Or worse, 15 people? I shook my head, trying to clear the dark thoughts. This was a tragedy, yes, but there was a rational explanation for all of it. June had ventured off trail, gotten disoriented, climbed up to that ledge, and either lost her footing or misjudged the edge. The shoe sole had torn off during the fall. The scratches were from rocks. The tally marks were from a previous hiker, maybe someone marking days while they were lost. It all made sense. It had to make sense. But as we worked to recover June's body from that dark ravine, as the shadows grew longer and the air grew colder, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. Something important. Something that was staring us right in the face, hiding in plain sight among the striped sediment and eroded formations of the Badlands. And I kept thinking about what Tom had said. Something that wanted her to fall. What kind of thing could want that? By the time we got June's body up to the top of the ravine, it was nearly 5 in the afternoon. The process had been slow and painstaking. We'd had to secure her in a litter and carefully haul her up using a pulley system. Every foot of progress felt like a small victory against the indifferent rock that had killed her. When we finally emerged from that gap between the formations, back onto the main Saddle Pass trail, the late afternoon sun was blinding after so long in the dimness of the ravine. I had to shield my eyes as we made our way down toward the trailhead. The husband, whose name I'd learned was Marcus Callahan, was still waiting by his vehicle. But now there was a sheriff's deputy with him, and when Marcus saw us coming down the trail with the litter, I watched his last shred of hope die. He let out a sound I'll never forget, a raw, animal wail of grief that echoed across the Badlands. He tried to run toward us, but the deputy held him back, and it took everything I had to maintain my professional composure as we brought his wife's body down that final stretch of trail. The medical examiner arrived shortly after, and I had to give my full statement to the deputy, a young guy named Anderson who looked barely old enough to shave, let alone handle a death investigation. I walked him through everything: the initial call, finding the day pack, climbing to the ledge, descending into the ravine, discovering the body. I didn't mention the tally marks. I told myself it was because they weren't relevant to June's fall, but the truth was I didn't know how to explain them without sounding crazy. When I was finally released from the scene, it was past 7. The sun was setting, painting the Badlands in those impossible shades of orange and purple that made the place look like an alien world. I drove back to the ranger station in a daze, my body running on autopilot while my mind replayed the day's events over and over. Bill was waiting for me when I pulled into the lot. He'd heard about the recovery over the radio and had stayed late to check on me. "Rough day," he said simply. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You did good, Cormac." Found her, gave the family closure. That's all we can do sometimes. "She was dead before I even started looking," I said quietly. "Probably died within the first few minutes of the fall. There was nothing I could have done." "I know, but you still did everything right. Go home, get some rest. Take tomorrow off if you need it." I shook my head. "I'll be fine. I'd rather work." Bill studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But Cormac, if you need to talk, my door's always open. This job, it gets to all of us sometimes." I went home that night to my small rental house on the outskirts of Interior, the closest town to the park. I tried to eat but couldn't stomach anything. I tried to watch TV but couldn't focus. Finally, around midnight, I gave up on sleep and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I typed Badlands National Park deaths into the search engine. The results were surprisingly limited. The park had a good safety record overall. There were occasional injuries, a few heat-related incidents, one bison goring that hadn't been fatal, but deaths were rare. I refined my search. Badlands Hiker Falls. Badlands off-trail deaths. Badlands climbing accidents. And then I found it. A news article from 6 years ago, just like Tom had mentioned. 23-year-old hiker dies in Badlands fall. I clicked on the article. The victim's name was Derek Morrison, a graduate student from Iowa who'd been visiting the park on a solo hiking trip. His body had been found at the bottom of a ravine in what the article described as a remote, unmaintained area of the park. The circumstances were eerily similar to June's death. Derek had been an experienced hiker. He'd gone off trail for reasons unknown. He'd been found with significant injuries consistent with a fall from height. And buried in the last paragraph of the article was a detail that made my hands go cold. Park rangers noted unusual damage to the victim's hiking boots, though investigators determined this was likely caused by the fall itself. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. 2 hikers, 6 years apart, same general area, same circumstances, same weird damage to their footwear. Coincidence? Maybe. The Badlands were dangerous, and people died in national parks all the time from falls, exposure, wildlife encounters. Statistics were statistics. But those tally marks, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken at the scene. Standard protocol for documentation. I found the image of the tally marks and zoomed in, studying them. 15 marks. But now that I was looking at them on a larger screen, I noticed something I'd missed in the dim light of the ravine. The marks weren't all the same depth. Some were deeper, more deliberate. And they weren't perfectly uniform. They had a slightly organic quality to them, like they'd been made by something other than a human hand or tool. I zoomed in further, and my breath caught in my throat. At the very edge of the photo, partially visible in the shadow, was something else scratched into the rock. I'd missed it completely at the scene, but here, on the screen, I could just make it out. Letters, or at least something that looked like letters. They were crude, jagged, but readable if you knew what you were looking for. They spelled out 2 words. Still hungry. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Those 2 words, still hungry, burned behind my eyelids every time I closed them. I kept zooming in on the photo, trying to convince myself I was seeing things, that it was just a trick of light and shadow, that my exhausted brain was finding patterns in random scratches. But no matter how many times I looked at it, the message remained clear. Still hungry. Hungry for what? And who or what had carved those words into the rock? By the time dawn broke, painting my kitchen in pale gray light, I'd made a decision. I was going to find out what the hell was happening in those formations. Protocol be damned. Suspension be damned. Someone or something was out there, and if I was right about what those tally marks meant, June Callahan and Derek Morrison weren't the only victims. I showered, dressed, and was at the ranger station by 6:30 a.m. Bill's truck was already in the lot. The man kept rancher's hours despite being a government employee. I found him in his office, nursing a cup of that terrible coffee and reviewing incident reports. "Thought I told you to take the day off," he said without looking up. I couldn't sleep. "Bill, I need to talk to you about something. About the Callahan case." He looked up at me then, and whatever he saw in my face made him set down his coffee and give me his full attention. "What's on your mind?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo of the tally marks. We found these carved into the rock wall at the bottom of the ravine. 15 marks. Fresh, made within the last few days according to Rodriguez. Bill studied the photo, his expression unreadable. Could be from anyone. Hikers mark time, mark distance, mark whatever. Doesn't mean anything necessarily. Now look at this. I zoomed in to show him the words. His face went pale. Jesus Christ. Tom mentioned there was a similar death 6 years ago. Derek Morrison. Same area, same circumstances, same weird damage to his boots. Bill was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and closed his office door. When he turned back to me, his expression was grave. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Understood?" I nodded. He sat back down and pulled out a file from his locked bottom drawer. The tab read Morrison, Derek, 2019. He opened it and slid it across the desk to me. I was the one who found Derek Morrison. I was the senior ranger on duty that day, and I led the search. And you're right, it was similar to what happened to June Callahan. Too similar. I flipped through the file. Photos of the scene, the body, and there, photos of Derek's boots. The soles were torn off, just like June's shoe. And there were those same parallel scratches in the rubber. "We documented everything," Bill continued. "Took photos, filed reports, did everything by the book. The medical examiner ruled it accidental death by falling, case closed. But you didn't think it was an accident," I finished. I didn't know what to think. Derek's body was found at the bottom of a ravine, yeah, but the positioning was wrong. He was face down, arms at his sides, like he'd been laid out. not the chaotic sprawl you'd expect from a fall. And his boots, those scratches looked like claw marks to me, though I couldn't prove it. Did you find any marks on the rock walls, like these? I pointed to the tally marks on my phone. Bill nodded slowly. We found scratches. Yeah, I didn't photograph them. At the time, I thought they were just natural erosion or damage from previous climbers. But now that you show me these, he rubbed his face with both hands. Shit, I should have documented them. It's not just Derek Morrison, I said. I did some research last night. There have been at least 4 other unexplained deaths in this park over the past 15 years. All hikers who went off trail, all found at the bottom of ravines or cliffs, all with unusual circumstances. Bill looked at me sharply. 4 others? You sure? I pulled out my notes. Emily Rogers, 2014. Found at the bottom of Castle Trail Overlook. Official cause of death, accidental fall. Thomas Brennan, 2011. Found in a ravine near the Door Trail. Accidental fall, Sarah Kim, 2008. Found deceased near Saddle Pass, same general area where we found June. Accidental fall, and Jennifer Hayes, 2006. Found in the Pinnacles area, accidental fall. Jesus, Bill breathed. You think they're all connected? I think someone, or something, has been hunting people in the Badlands for at least 15 years. And I think those tally marks are a count, 15 victims. Bill was quiet for a long time, staring at the Morrison file. Finally, he said, "If you're right about this, and I'm not saying you are, but if you're right, why hasn't anyone noticed the pattern before?" Because the deaths are spread out over years. Different rangers on duty, different circumstances, and they all look like accidents. Nothing obviously connects them except... I hesitated. Except what? Except they all went off trail after reporting that they saw something. June's husband said she mentioned seeing something moving on the formations. I went back through the old articles and reports. Derek Morrison told his campsite neighbors he thought he'd spotted someone waving at him from a ridge. Sarah Kim posted on her hiking blog the day before she died that she'd seen something strange near the formations. Emily Rogers called the visitor center to report a possible lost hiker in the area. They all saw something that made them go looking. Bill leaned back in his chair, and I could see him wrestling with the implications. So, what are you suggesting? That there's a serial killer operating in the park? Someone who lures hikers off trail and then, what, pushes them off cliffs? I don't know, but I think we need to take another look at that ravine. In daylight, with a full team. If there are more marks, more evidence, we need to find it. Bill considered this for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll assemble a team. But Cormac, you're still technically on suspension. I can't have you officially involved in this. Then I'll go unofficially. I know where that ravine is, and I know what to look for. Fine. But you're taking Tom with you, and you're both armed. If there's even a chance someone dangerous is out there, I'm not risking anyone else. 2 hours later, Tom and I were back at the Saddle Pass trailhead, this time with full climbing gear, extra rope, and our service weapons. The morning was clear and cold, with that sharp autumn light that made every detail of the Badlands stand out in crisp relief. We made good time up the trail and through the gap in the formations. In daylight, the journey didn't seem nearly as ominous as it had the day before, but I still felt a prickling unease as we entered the first basin where June's pack had been found. "This is where her day pack was," I told Tom, pointing to the spot. Jacket and one shoe were up on that ledge. We climbed up to the ledge, and I showed him where I'd found the items. Then we made our way along the narrow path to the second basin in the edge of the ravine. "And her other shoe was right there," I said, pointing to the spot at the cliff edge. "Sole separated, scratches in the rubber." Tom crouched down at the edge, examining the ground. "And you descended from here?" "Yeah, rope-assisted on the vertical section. It's about 65 feet to the bottom." We set up our climbing gear properly this time, securing multiple anchor points and using a proper belay system. Within 15 minutes, we were both at the bottom of the ravine, standing in the spot where June's body had been. "Show me where the marks were," Tom said. I led him about 15 feet down the ravine corridor to the spot where Rodriguez had found the tally marks. In the bright LED light from our headlamps, they were even clearer than they'd been before. 15 marks. Deep scratches in the soft sedimentary rock, uniform in size and spacing. And there, partially hidden in shadow, were those two words, "Still hungry." Tom traced the letters with his gloved finger, careful not to disturb them. "This is deliberate. Someone carved this. Recently. Look at the depth of the scratches," I said, "and the spacing. These weren't made with a knife or a chisel. They're too organic, too irregular." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't think a human hand made these marks." Tom looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Then what did? A bear? Mountain lions don't live this far into the Badlands, and even if they did, they don't carve words in rock." "I know how it sounds. But look at the evidence. The scratches on the shoe soles. The way the victims are found. The message." I gestured at the wall. "Something is hunting people here, Tom. Something that's smart enough to lure them off trail and strong enough to tear their boots apart." Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, "Let's keep looking. If there's more evidence, we'll find it." We spent the next hour systematically searching the ravine, documenting everything we found. About 30 feet down from the tally marks, we discovered something else scratched into the rock. Crude drawings of stick figures. They appeared to show people falling, tumbling head over heels down a cliff face. There were 6 of them, each one more distorted than the last. "This is sick," Tom muttered. "Whoever did this is seriously disturbed." We continued deeper into the ravine, which narrowed and twisted, sometimes barely wide enough for us to squeeze through sideways. The walls rose higher and higher on either side of us, and the sky above became just a thin ribbon of blue. And then the ravine opened up into a chamber. It wasn't large, maybe 20 feet across and roughly circular, but it was clearly not a natural formation. Someone had excavated this space, carving it out of the soft rock over what must have been years. The walls were covered in scratches and marks, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. More tally marks, more drawings, and more words. Hungry, waiting, watching, falling, breaking, screaming. The words repeated over and over, covering every available surface. And in the center of the chamber, arranged in a perfect circle, were items. Personal items. A water bottle, a hiking pole, a digital camera, a key ring with a rabbit's foot attached, a hair tie, a granola bar wrapper. Tom swept his light across the collection and I could see his hand moving toward his weapon. "What the hell is this?" I moved closer to the circle of items, careful not to disturb anything. Each object looked like it had been carefully cleaned and placed with deliberate precision. I crouched down and examined them more closely with my flashlight. The water bottle had a name written on it in permanent marker. Emily. The camera was an older model, the kind that used SD cards. I popped open the battery compartment. The batteries were long dead, but the SD card was still there. The key ring. I picked it up carefully with my gloved hand. Attached to it was a driver's license in a plastic sleeve. The photo showed a young man with sandy hair and a wide smile. Derek Morrison. Date of birth, March 14th, 1996. "Tom," I said quietly, "these are trophies. From the victims." Tom moved closer, shining his light over the collection. "Jesus Christ, how many are there?" I counted quickly. 15 items, 15 victims, 15 tally marks, 15 years of hunting. "We need to get out of here and call this in," Tom said, his voice tight with tension. "This is a crime scene. FBI jurisdiction. We're way out of our depth." I nodded, but as I stood up, something caught my eye. In the far corner of the chamber, partially hidden in shadow, was an opening. Not a natural crack or crevice, but a carved passage that led deeper into the rock. "Tom, look at this." He came over and shined his light into the passage. It extended back into darkness, the walls smooth and regular, definitely man-made. "No," Tom said firmly. "Absolutely not. We're not going in there. We're calling this in right now." But before either of us could move, we heard something. A sound echoing from somewhere deep in the passage. It started as a low scraping, like metal on stone, and then it rose in pitch, becoming almost musical. It was whistling. Someone was whistling a tune, and it was getting closer. The melody was familiar, childhood simple. The wheels on the bus. Tom's hand went to his weapon, and mine followed. We both backed towards the entrance of the chamber, our lights trained on that dark passage. "Park Rangers," Tom called out, his voice steady despite the tension in his posture. "Identify yourself and come out slowly with your hands visible." The whistling stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Tom's breathing, the faint whistle of wind through the ravine high above us. Then, from the darkness of the passage came a voice. It was thin, reedy, almost childlike. "Rangers," it said, drawing out the word. "You shouldn't be here. This is my place, my collection." "Come out where we can see you," Tom commanded. "We're armed, and we will use force if necessary." A sound like laughter echoed from the passage. "Guns won't help you, Ranger. Nothing helps them when they fall. They scream, and then they stop. And I collect my prizes." Movement in the darkness. Something pale and hunched emerging from the passage, moving in a way that wasn't quite human. It walked on all fours, but its limbs were too long, its joints bending in wrong directions. "Holy shit," Tom breathed, and I heard the fear in his voice, the same fear that was turning my blood to ice. The thing came into the light of our headlamps, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. It had been human once, maybe. The basic shape was there. Head, torso, limbs. But everything was wrong. The skin was pale and stretched tight over bones that seemed too numerous and too angular. The fingers were elongated, ending in yellowed, broken nails that looked like claws. Its face was the worst part. A human face, but hollowed out, skeletal, with eyes that were too large and too dark and reflected our lights like an animal's. But it was wearing clothes. Tattered, filthy clothes that had once been a ranger uniform. And on its chest, barely visible under the grime and decay, was a name tag. "Alice," Tom read aloud. "Marcus Alice." The thing that had been Marcus Alice tilted its head at an unnatural angle. I remember that name from before I fell, before I broke, before I changed. I suddenly remembered the diary I'd found in the watchtower, the one written by the ranger before me. His name had been Mark Alice. "You were a ranger," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as every instinct screamed at me to run. "You were stationed in a watchtower. You wrote a diary." The creature made that laughing sound again. "The tower. Yes. I watched and watched and watched the shapes in the rocks, watched them move, watched them whisper, and one day I went to look. I went to see what was calling me, and I fell." "You fell from the rocks," I said, understanding, clicking into place. "You should have died, but you didn't. Something down here changed you." "The rocks are old," the thing said, moving closer. We both raised our weapons, but it didn't seem to care. Older than the park, older than the rangers, older than anything. They've been here since before, and they'll be here after. And they're hungry. Always hungry. They took me and made me their hunter. I find the curious ones, the ones who see things moving in the rocks. I show myself just a glimpse, a figure on a ridge, a shadow in a crevice, and they come looking. They always come looking. And you lead them to the edges, Tom said. You chase them until they fall. They fall so beautifully, the creature whispered. And when they break on the rocks, when the life leaves them, I take a prize. A small thing to remember them by, 15 prizes. 15 lovely fallers. It moved closer still, and I could smell it now, the stench of decay and something else, something mineral and ancient. We're leaving, Tom said firmly, and we're bringing people back. This ends today. The creature laughed again, and the sound echoed weirdly in the chamber. You're not leaving, Rangers. You've seen too much. You're in my collection place, and that means... It tensed, muscles bunching under that stretched skin. You're going to fall too. It lunged. Tom fired first, 3 rapid shots that echoed deafeningly in the confined space. I fired a second later, my training taking over even as my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. The bullets hit the creature. I saw the impact, saw it stagger, but it didn't stop. It kept coming, moving with impossible speed. Tom tried to dodge, but the creature's elongated arm whipped out and caught him across the chest, sending him crashing into the rock wall. I heard the air leave his lungs in a painful whoosh. I fired again, backing toward the chamber entrance. The creature turned its attention to me, those 2 large eyes fixing on mine. You're going to fall, Ranger, just like the others, just like your friend, and I'll take something pretty from your pockets to remember you by. It charged, and I ran. I threw myself back through the entrance to the chamber, into the narrow ravine corridor. Behind me, I could hear the creature scrambling after me, its claws scraping against the rock. I ran as fast as I dared, my headlamp bobbing wildly, throwing crazy shadows on the walls. The ravine twisted and turned, and I had to slow down to navigate the tight corners. The creature was gaining on me. I could hear its breathing, harsh and wet, and that awful scraping of its claws on stone. I reached the section where we'd found the tally marks and the words. The rope we'd used to descend was still hanging there, and I grabbed it without thinking, starting to climb. My arms screamed with effort, my shoulders burning as I hauled myself up hand over hand. Below me, the creature reached the base of the rope and looked up. For a moment, I thought it might climb after me, and I prepared to kick it in the face if it got close enough. But it didn't climb. Instead, it just stood there, watching me with those horrible eyes. And then it spoke again, its voice carrying clearly up the ravine. "You'll be back," it said. "They always come back. The curious ones, the ones who need to know. And when you do, I'll be waiting. I'm always waiting." I kept climbing until I reached the top, my arms shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. I pulled myself over the edge and collapsed on the ground of the second basin, gasping for breath. Tom. I'd left Tom down there with that thing. I grabbed my radio with trembling hands. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Cormac, emergency. Officer down. I need immediate backup at Saddle Pass Ravine System. Armed suspect, extremely dangerous. Multiple homicides confirmed. Get FBI, get everyone, now." Sarah's voice came back, sharp with urgency. "Copy, Ranger Cormac. Units are en route. What's your status?" I'm alive. Tom Patterson is still down there. We need a full tactical team. This suspect is, how could I explain? Just get everyone here, fast." I waited at the edge of that ravine, my weapon drawn, watching for any sign of movement from below. Minutes felt like hours. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to rationalize it, trying to make it make sense. Marcus Alice, a ranger who'd gone missing years ago, who'd supposedly left his post without notice. He'd found something in those rocks, or something had found him, and it had transformed him into, what, some kind of predator? A thing that lived in the darkness and hunted humans? The sound of voices and footsteps from the direction of the main trail snapped me back to reality. Within minutes, the area was swarming with rangers, sheriff's deputies, and paramedics. Bill was among them, his face grave. "Cormac, what happened? Where's Tom?" I told him everything. The chamber, the trophies, the creature that had been Marcus Alice. I watched his expression shift from concern to disbelief to something like horror. "A creature," he said, flatly. "You're telling me a creature attacked you?" "I know how it sounds, Bill, but I saw it. Tom saw it. We both shot it. It's down there right now, and Tom is with it. We need to get him out." A tactical team from the state police arrived within the hour, heavily armed and equipped with climbing gear. They descended into the ravine while I waited at the top, giving them detailed descriptions of the layout and what they'd find. It took them 3 hours to search the ravine system. They found the chamber with the trophies. That much I'd gotten right. They found the carved passage, though they said it only extended about 50 feet before terminating in a collapse of rock and debris. They found Tom Patterson's body in the chamber. Cause of death: blunt force trauma consistent with being thrown against a rock wall. His weapon was still in his hand, 4 rounds fired, but they didn't find any creature. No body, no blood, no sign that anything other than Tom and I had been down there. The investigation that followed was intensive and exhausting. FBI came in, as did the National Park Service's Criminal Investigation Unit. They analyzed everything in that chamber, collected DNA from the trophies, and confirmed that the items belonged to previous victims. The carved passage was cleared, and they found more chambers beyond, more trophies, more victims. The final count was 23 people over a span of nearly 20 years. 23 hikers who'd gone missing in the Badlands and were never found. Until now. My story about the creature was not well received. The official conclusion was that I'd encountered a human serial killer living in the ravine system, that the stress of the situation and the poor lighting had caused me to misperceive what I'd seen. They found evidence that someone had been living in the chambers: crude bedding, stored food, water collection systems. The creature, they said, was just a severely disturbed individual who'd been hiding in the Badlands for years. They searched for weeks, but no suspect was ever found. No Marcus Alice. No creature. Nothing. Tom Patterson's death was ruled a homicide by person or persons unknown. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, though the incident ended my suspension early. They needed all available rangers for the massive search operation. That was 6 months ago. The ravine system has been sealed off now, the entrance blocked with steel grating and warning signs. The section of the park where all this happened is officially closed to hikers. The media reported it as the discovery of a serial killer's lair, and for a few weeks, the Badlands National Park was famous for all the wrong reasons. But the visitors eventually came back. The story faded from the news cycle. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after something like that. I still work as a ranger here. I couldn't leave, even though part of me wanted to. I feel like I owe it to the victims, to Tom, to stay and make sure nothing like this ever happens again. But sometimes, when I'm out on patrol in the more remote areas of the park, I see things. A figure standing on a distant ridge, watching me. Movement in the rocks that doesn't quite match the wind. And once, just once, I heard whistling carried on the breeze. The tune was familiar. The wheels on the bus. I tell myself it's my imagination. Trauma playing tricks on my mind. There's no creature in the Badlands. There's just rock and wind and the endless sky. But I also know what I saw. I know what's still out there, hiding in those ancient formations. And I know that somewhere in the depths of the ravine system, past the sealed entrance and the warning signs, something is waiting. The first thing you learn as a ranger in the Badlands is that the weather out here doesn't follow rules. It doesn't give warnings. It doesn't care about your schedule or your plans, or whether you're ready for it. The sky can be clear and blue one minute, and the next minute you're in the middle of a storm that's trying to kill you. My name is Ellen Draper, and I've been a ranger with the National Park Service at Badlands National Park for 8 years now. That's long enough to know better than to trust the weather forecasts, but not long enough to stop being surprised when South Dakota decides to remind me who's really in charge out here. It was late October, about 3 weeks before the park would enter its quiet season. The tourist traffic had already thinned out considerably. Most visitors prefer the summer months when the temperatures are bearable and the roads are guaranteed to be clear. October brings unpredictable weather, early sunsets, and the kind of cold that seeps into your bones during the night shifts. I'd started my evening patrol at 6 p.m., just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The sky was that particular shade of orange and purple that makes the Badlands look like something from another planet. The temperature was dropping fast. It had been in the low 60s during the day, but I knew we'd hit freezing by midnight. My patrol route that evening covered the northern section of the park, including some of the more remote camping areas and overlooks. It was a quiet shift, which suited me fine. I'd spent the afternoon dealing with a group of college kids who thought it would be fun to try climbing one of the formations without gear, and I was looking forward to a few hours of peace. I radioed dispatch around 7:30. Ranger Draper checking in. Northern section is clear, no incidents to report. Weather's holding steady. The dispatcher was Kyle Hernandez, a reliable guy who'd been working the desk for about 3 years. Copy that, Draper. Forecast is calling for possible rain overnight, but nothing severe. Should be a quiet night for you. Famous last words. By 8 p.m., I was parked at the Pinnacle's overlook, finishing up some paperwork in my vehicle. The wind had picked up noticeably in the last half hour, and when I looked up from my clipboard, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The western sky, which had been clear earlier, was now dark. Not the natural darkness of evening, but the kind of dark that comes with serious weather, and it was moving fast, rolling across the prairie like a living thing, swallowing the last remnants of daylight as it came. I grabbed my radio. Dispatch, this is Draper. I'm seeing some concerning weather development from my position at Pinnacles. That forecast might need updating. This looks like more than just rain. There was a pause before Kyle came back. Let me check the radar. Stand by. I watched the storm approach while I waited. Lightning flickered inside the cloud bank, illuminating it from within like something alive. The wind was really howling now, strong enough to rock my vehicle slightly. I'd seen bad weather in the Badlands before, but there was something about the speed and intensity of this system that set my nerves on edge. Draper, radar is showing a fast-moving storm cell headed your way. Looks like heavy rain, possible hail, wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. It's moving northeast, should hit your position in about 20 minutes. We're not getting any tornado warnings, but this came up fast on the radar. Might be a good idea to find some shelter. Copy that. I'm going to head back toward... Static crackled over the radio, cutting me off. Then, Kyle's voice came back, broken and distorted. Draper. Getting a call. Campers. Sage Creek. Dispatch, you're breaking up. Say again. More static. Then, clear as day. Emergency call from campers at Sage Creek Campground. Party of 2 reporting vehicle trouble and requesting assistance. Can you respond? Sage Creek Campground was about 15 miles from my current position, most of it on dirt roads. With that storm bearing down, it would be tight. But if there were people out there in trouble with bad weather coming, I didn't have a choice. Copy. Dispatch. I'm en route to Sage Creek. ETA 25 minutes. Have them stay with their vehicle until I arrive. Will do. Be careful out there, Draper. I fired up the engine and pulled out of the overlook, heading north on the loop road before turning onto one of the access roads that would take me to Sage Creek. The campground was in one of the most remote areas of the park, a primitive camping area with no facilities, no lights, and no cell service. During the busy season, it was popular with hardcore campers who wanted to get away from it all. In late October, it was usually deserted. The first drops of rain hit my windshield about 5 minutes into the drive. They were big, heavy drops that smacked against the glass with surprising force. Within seconds, it escalated into a downpour so intense that my wipers could barely keep up. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. I slowed to a crawl, leaning forward to peer through the windshield, trying to stay on the road. The headlights barely penetrated the wall of rain, and the wind was strong enough now that I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands to keep the vehicle from being pushed sideways. Lightning flashed, bright enough to make me squint, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder so loud I felt it in my chest. The storm was right on top of me. My radio crackled. Per, you there? Dispatch, barely reading you. I'm in heavy rain, about 10 miles from Sage Creek. What's the status on those campers? Lost contact. Signal. Check on. The radio dissolved into static. I tried to respond a few more times, but it was clear I wasn't getting through. The storm was interfering with the signal, which meant I was on my own until I reached the campground. The dirt road to Sage Creek was already turning to mud under the onslaught of rain. I could feel my tires starting to slip and slide, and I had to drop my speed even further. The last thing I needed was to get stuck out here. I'd been on this road dozens of times in daylight, but at night, in this weather, it felt like I was driving through an alien landscape. Another flash of lightning, and in that brief moment of illumination, I saw something that made me hit the brakes. About 50 yards ahead, pulled off to the side of the road, was a vehicle. It was hard to make out details in the rain, but it looked like a Jeep, and it was sitting at an odd angle, like it had slid partially into the ditch. I grabbed my radio and tried to call it in, but I was still getting nothing but static. I'd have to check it out myself. I pulled my Ranger vehicle to a stop about 20 feet behind the Jeep, leaving my headlights on to provide some illumination. Then I grabbed my rain gear, my flashlight, and my first aid kit, and stepped out into the storm. The wind and rain hit me like a physical force. Within seconds, I was soaked despite the rain gear. I had to lean into the wind just to move forward, and the rain was coming down so hard it actually stung my face. I'd experienced bad weather before, but this was extreme even by Badlands standards. I approached the Jeep cautiously, my flashlight beam cutting through the rain. It was an older model, maybe 10 years old, dark green or blue, hard to tell in the rain and darkness. The passenger side was closest to me, and I could see that the windows were rolled up. I couldn't see anyone inside. "Park Rangers," I called out, though I knew the wind would probably carry my voice away. "Is anyone here?" No response. I moved closer, shining my light through the passenger window. The interior was empty. No people, but there were signs that someone had been here recently. A backpack on the passenger seat, a water bottle in the cup holder, a map stuffed into the door pocket. I moved around to the driver's side. The Jeep was definitely stuck. The rear wheels had slid into the soft shoulder, and the back end was sitting lower than the front. It would need a tow to get out of there. I tried the driver's door. Unlocked, I pulled it open, and the interior light came on automatically. That's when I saw it. On the steering wheel, clear as day despite the rain and the darkness, was a handprint. A bloody handprint. I stepped back instinctively, my hand moving to the radio on my belt before I remembered it wasn't working. I swept my flashlight around the interior of the Jeep more carefully now, looking for additional signs of injury or violence. The driver's seat showed signs of recent occupancy. It was pushed back, adjusted for someone tall. There were muddy footprints on the floor mat. And there, on the seat itself, were more blood smears. Not a lot, but enough to be concerning. I moved to the back of the Jeep and tried the rear hatch. It opened with a metallic click. Inside was your typical camping gear, a cooler, some sleeping bags, a tent bag, and a portable stove. But what caught my attention was the red plastic gas can tucked against the back of the rear seat. I picked it up carefully, testing its weight. It was about half full, maybe 2 or 3 gallons of gasoline sloshing around inside. Why would someone have a fuel can in their vehicle out here? The nearest gas station was 30 miles away in Wall, and the park didn't have any facilities where you could refill. I set the can back down and closed the hatch, my mind racing. Someone had been driving this Jeep. They'd gotten stuck in the mud. There was blood on the steering wheel and seat, which suggested an injury. And then they'd... what? Left the vehicle and walked off into the storm? That didn't make sense. Anyone with half a brain would know that the safest place to be during a storm like this was inside a vehicle. Walking around in the dark, in unfamiliar terrain, during a thunderstorm was a good way to get yourself killed. Unless they weren't thinking clearly. Head injury, maybe, from the accident? Or they'd been running from something. I needed to find them. I walked around the Jeep in a wide circle, shining my flashlight on the ground, looking for footprints or any sign of which direction they might have gone. It was nearly impossible in the rain. Any tracks would have been washed away almost immediately. But about 15 feet from the driver's door, my light caught something. A shoe, a brown hiking boot lying on its side in the mud. I picked it up, examining it in my flashlight beam. It was a men's boot, size 11 or 12, relatively new. The laces were still tied. Whoever had been wearing this hadn't stopped to untie it. They'd just pulled their foot out and left it behind. Why would someone leave their shoe? I was starting to get a very bad feeling about this situation. The blood, the abandoned vehicle, the shoe, none of it added up to anything good. I needed to get back to my vehicle and try to get my radio working, call in backup, and organize a proper search. As I turned to head back, my flashlight beam caught something else. Another footprint, this one in a relatively sheltered spot under a small overhang of rock where the rain hadn't completely washed it away. It was a boot print pointing away from the road toward the deeper part of the Badlands. And next to it, another print. This one was smaller, different. Tread pattern. 2 people then, moving together, or one following the other. I followed the prints as far as I could, which wasn't very far. After about 30 feet, they disappeared completely in the rain and mud. But the direction was clear. They'd headed northwest into the formations, away from the road and deeper into one of the most remote sections of the park. I made my way back to my vehicle, my mind working through the possibilities. 2 people, vehicle stuck, injury of some kind, and then they'd walked off into the storm toward the formations. It didn't make any sense unless one of them was hurt badly enough that they weren't thinking clearly, or unless they were running from something. But what would they be running from out here? I climbed back into my vehicle, dripping water everywhere, and tried my radio again. Still nothing but static. I checked my cell phone even though I knew it was pointless. No signal, as expected. The nearest working radio would be back at the ranger station, over 20 miles away. I looked at my GPS unit, marking the location of the abandoned Jeep. Then I looked at the map, trying to figure out where two people on foot might be heading in that direction. There was nothing out there. No trails, no shelters, no facilities, just miles and miles of eroded formations, prairie, and the occasional dried-up creek bed. Unless they knew about the old mining roads. The Badlands had a history of small-scale mining operations back in the early 20th century, mostly unsuccessful attempts to extract gold and other minerals from the formations. Most of those operations had been abandoned decades ago, but the roads they'd built to access them were still there, if you knew where to look. Some of them led to old mining camps, most of which were just ruins now. I pulled out my more detailed topographic map, the one that showed features not marked on the standard park maps. There, about 2 miles northwest of my current position, there was an old mining road that led up into the formations. And at the end of that road, according to my notes, was the remains of what had once been a small mining camp. If someone was hurt and disoriented, and if they happened to stumble onto that old road, they might follow it thinking it would lead them to help. Or, if they were looking for shelter, those old buildings, whatever was left of them, might seem like a good option. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. I made a decision. I would drive as close as I could get to that old mining road, then proceed on foot if necessary. If I found the missing people, great. If I didn't find them within an hour, I'd head back to the station, get backup, and organize a proper search and rescue operation at first light. I put my vehicle in gear and started northwest, following the GPS coordinates as best I could. The terrain was rough, and I had to go slowly to avoid getting stuck myself. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and the wind was strong enough that I could feel it pushing against the side of my vehicle. About a mile in, I found what I was looking for. A faint depression in the landscape that was all that remained of the old mining road. It was barely visible, overgrown with prairie grass and eroded by decades of wind and rain, but it was there. I followed it for another half-mile before the terrain got too rough for my vehicle. I'd have to continue on foot from here. I geared up, rain gear already on, flashlight in hand, backup flashlight in my belt, first aid kit in my backpack, radio, useless but I brought it anyway, water, and emergency supplies. I also grabbed my service weapon and made sure it was secure in its holster. I didn't expect to need it, but out here, you never knew. Before I left the vehicle, I took one more look at the map, memorizing the route to the old mining camp. 2 miles on foot, rough terrain, in the dark and rain. This was probably a terrible idea, but if someone was hurt out there, I couldn't just leave them. I stepped out into the storm for the second time that night, and immediately the wind tried to knock me over. I bent low and started walking, following the faint remains of the old road as it wound its way up into the formations. The landscape around me was surreal in the darkness and lightning flashes. The striped formations rose up on either side of me like frozen waves, their layered sediment glowing briefly with each lightning strike before disappearing back into darkness. The rain had turned the normally dry ground into a treacherous mix of mud and loose rock that threatened to send me sliding with every step. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I saw the light. It was faint, just a flicker, somewhere up ahead in the formations. I stopped, squinting through the rain, trying to determine if I'd really seen it or if it was just my eyes playing tricks in the storm. There it was again. Definitely a light, and it was moving. Someone was up there. I increased my pace, climbing over rocks and pushing through the wind and rain. The light disappeared and reappeared as the terrain shifted, but I kept moving toward where I'd last seen it. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A scream. Distant, barely audible over the wind and thunder, but definitely a scream. It was high-pitched, terrified, and it cut off abruptly. I started running. I ran as fast as the terrain would allow, which wasn't very fast. The ground was slick with mud and loose rock, and I had to use my hands to scramble up the steeper sections. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I moved, creating disorienting shadows that made it hard to judge distances and obstacles. The light I'd seen was closer now, maybe 100 yards ahead. It was stationary, no longer moving, and I hadn't heard another scream, which could mean anything from "everything's fine" to "it's too late." I tried not to think about the latter possibility. I crested a small ridge and found myself looking down into a natural depression in the formations. The depression was maybe 50 feet across and roughly circular, with steep rock walls rising on 3 sides. And there, huddled against the far wall, was a figure illuminated by a battery-powered lantern. "Park rangers," I called out, trying to make my voice heard over the storm. "I'm here to help." The figure jerked upright at my voice, and I caught a glimpse of a face in the lantern light. Young, male, maybe late 20s, with a beard and wide, frightened eyes. He was wearing a rain-soaked jacket and jeans, and I noticed immediately that he was only wearing one boot. This had to be one of the people from the Jeep. I made my way down into the depression, moving carefully on the slippery slope. As I got closer, I could see more details. The man was shaking. Whether from cold, fear, or both, I couldn't tell. His hands were pressed against the rock wall behind him, and there was blood on them. His left hand in particular looked bad, with what appeared to be a deep gash across the palm. "Sir, I'm Ranger Ellen Draper with the National Park Service. Are you injured? Where's your companion?" He stared at me for a moment like he couldn't quite process what I was saying. Then his eyes focused, and words tumbled out of him in a rush. "He's gone. Cody's gone." I couldn't. There was so much blood, and I tried to help, but he ran, and I couldn't find him, and the storm came, and I don't know where he is. "Okay, slow down," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "What's your name?" "Marcus. Marcus Bellamy." "All right, Marcus. I need you to take a deep breath and tell me what happened. Start from the beginning. You and Cody were camping?" He nodded jerkily. "Cody Lang. We drove out from Sioux Falls for the weekend. We were at Sage Creek, set up camp this afternoon. Everything was fine. It was supposed to be a quick trip, you know? Get away from work, clear our heads." "What happened to your vehicle?" "The storm. It came up so fast. We were in the tent and suddenly there's this wind and rain, and the tent is trying to blow away. We managed to get to the Jeep, Cody's Jeep, and we were going to drive back to the main road, wait it out somewhere safer. But the road was already muddy, and we slid off into the shoulder. Couldn't get the wheels to grip. Cody tried to rock us out, but we were just digging deeper." I could see him starting to shake harder. Shock, probably, combined with hypothermia. I needed to get him warm and get some more information before his condition deteriorated further. "Here," I said, pulling an emergency blanket from my pack and draping it around his shoulders. "Keep talking. What happened after you got stuck?" "Cody said we should stay in the Jeep, wait for the storm to pass, but then he remembered we had the gas can in the back. We'd filled it up in wall because he wasn't sure how far the tank would get us out here. He had this idea that if we couldn't get the Jeep out, maybe we could at least use the extra gas to keep the engine running, keep warm. So he got the gas can out of the back. Yeah, he went around to open the hatch, and I saw him pull it out through the rear-view mirror. But then he was taking a long time, so I got out to see what was wrong. That's when I saw them." My hand instinctively moved toward my weapon. Saw who? 2 guys. They were just standing there in the rain, maybe 20 feet away. I couldn't see their faces very well because of the storm, but they were watching us. Just watching. And Cody, he didn't see them at first because he was focused on the gas can. I yelled at him, warned him, and that's when everything went to hell. "What did they do?" Marcus's eyes got a distant look, like he was seeing it all over again. "One of them rushed at Cody, just came out of the rain like a ghost. Cody dropped the gas can and tried to defend himself, but the guy had something in his hand. A knife, I think, or maybe just a rock. They were fighting, and I ran over to help, but the other guy grabbed me. He held up his injured hand. I got this, trying to pull him off me. His grip was like iron. He was saying something, but I couldn't hear over the storm. And then there was this crack, thunder, I thought at first, but Cody screamed, and the first guy let him go, and Cody just ran. He just took off running into the formations. And the two men, what did they do? The one holding me, he let go suddenly. Both of them just turned and ran after Cody. I didn't understand why. They could have taken the Jeep, taken our stuff, whatever they wanted, but they went after him instead, and He looked down at his hands. I should have gone after them, should have helped Cody, but I was so scared. I just grabbed the lantern from the Jeep and ran the other direction. I'm a coward. I left my best friend out there. I squeezed his shoulder. You did what you had to do to survive. That's not cowardice. Now, which direction did Cody run? He pointed roughly northeast. That way, I think, into those formations. The two guys chased him. Northeast. That was away from the old mining camp, deeper into the backcountry. If Cody Lang was out there injured and being pursued, he could be anywhere by now. And if these two attackers were still in the area... Marcus, I need you to listen to me carefully. Did you get a good look at either of these men? Can you describe them? He shook his head. It was too dark, too much rain. All I know is they were both male, average height maybe, wearing dark clothes. One of them had a hood pulled up. I'm sorry, I know that's not helpful. It wasn't much to go on, but it was something. Two male suspects, possibly armed, dangerous enough to attack two men at a remote campsite during a storm. The question was why? Random violence? Robbery gone wrong? Or something else? All right, here's what we're going to do. I need to get you back to my vehicle where you'll be safe and warm. Then I'm going to look for Cody and these two suspects. You can't go out there alone, Marcus protested. These guys, they're dangerous. You saw the blood on the steering wheel. That was from Cody. He was hurt bad when he ran. I'm a trained ranger, Marcus. This is what I do. But I need you to do exactly as I say. Can you walk? He nodded, pushing himself away from the wall. He was unsteady on his feet, but with my help he could make it. We started back the way I'd come, Marcus leaning on me for support. The storm was still raging, but it seemed to have lost some of its earlier intensity. The rain was still heavy, but not quite the blinding wall of water it had been before. Progress was slow, but we made it back to my vehicle in about 30 minutes. I got Marcus into the passenger seat, turned on the heat, and gave him water and some energy bars from my emergency supplies. While he warmed up, I tried my radio again. Still static, but maybe slightly better than before. The storm was breaking up, which meant the interference should improve. Dispatch, this is Ranger Draper. Do you copy? I tried several times, adjusting frequencies. Finally, I got a response. Aper, barely, you, dispatch. I have one subject located. Injured but stable. Second subject still missing, possibly injured, being pursued by two male suspects. Location is approximately 2 miles northwest of Sage Creek Campground. I need backup and search and rescue. Repeat, I have a potential violent situation with a missing person. Request immediate assistance. The response was broken, but I caught enough to know they'd received my message. Help was coming. But in this weather and terrain, it would take at least an hour for anyone to reach us. Maybe longer. I turned to Marcus. Help is on the way. I need you to stay in this vehicle with the doors locked. Do not open them for anyone except another ranger. Do you understand? You're really going back out there? I have to. Cody might still be alive, and every minute counts. I checked my weapon. made sure I had fresh batteries in my flashlight. If I'm not back in an hour, or if anyone approaches the vehicle who isn't in a Park Service uniform, you use the radio, Channel 6. Just keep hitting the call button and saying emergency. Someone will hear you. I could see the fear in his eyes, but he nodded. Find him. Please find Cody. I'll do everything I can. I stepped back out into the storm, which had indeed lessened but was still plenty miserable. This time, I headed northeast, following the direction Marcus had indicated. Finding tracks was impossible in these conditions, so I had to rely on logic and experience. If Cody Lang was hurt and being chased, he would look for shelter. The formations out here were full of small caves, overhangs, and natural shelters. He might have ducked into one of them. Or, if he was disoriented from blood loss, he might have just kept running until he collapsed. I swept my flashlight back and forth as I walked, looking for any sign. Blood, torn clothing, footprints, anything. The beam illuminated the bizarre landscape of the Badlands, all those layered sediments creating an otherworldly terrain of peaks and valleys, ridges and ravines. After about 15 minutes, I found something. A piece of fabric snagged on a sharp outcropping of rock. It was dark blue, maybe from a jacket, and it was fresh, still wet from the rain, not weathered or faded. I was on the right track. I continued in the same direction, moving carefully, my senses on high alert. Every shadow could be a person. Every sound, and there were plenty between the wind, the rain, and the occasional rumble of thunder, could be a threat. That's when I heard voices. They were faint, coming from somewhere ahead and to my left. I couldn't make out words, but it was definitely human voices. Plural. At least 2 people talking, maybe arguing. I killed my flashlight and moved forward slowly, using the ambient light from the storm's lightning flashes to navigate. As I got closer, the voices became clearer. 2 men, just as Marcus had described, and they sounded angry. Told you we should have grabbed them both. Wasn't the plan. Just needed one. Getting away. Need to find him before. I crept closer, using the formations as cover. My heart was hammering in my chest, but my hands were steady. Years of training kicked in. Assess the situation. Identify the threats. Plan your response. I reached a position where I could see them without being seen. 2 men, just as Marcus had described, wearing dark rain gear. They were standing at the entrance to what looked like a small cave or overhang in the rock face. One of them was holding a flashlight, sweeping the beam back and forth across the terrain. The other had something in his hand that glinted in the light. A knife. Definitely a knife. He can't have gotten far, the one with the knife said. Not with that wound. He's probably holed up somewhere close. We should split up, cover more ground. No. We stay together. Last thing we need is to lose each other out here. They moved away from the overhang, heading deeper into the formations. I waited until they were out of sight, then quickly moved to the spot they'd just left. If they were searching this area, it was because they thought Cody Lang was nearby. I checked the overhang with my flashlight, keeping the beam low and shielded. It was shallow, maybe 6 feet deep, with a sandy floor. And there, on that floor, were clear signs that someone had been here recently. Boot prints in the sand and, my stomach clenched, a small pool of blood. Fresh blood. Still wet. Cody Lang had been here, recently. But he'd moved on, or been forced to move on, which meant he was still alive, still running. But why? Why were these 2 men so determined to find him? This wasn't robbery. They hadn't taken anything from the Jeep or from Marcus. This was targeted. They wanted Cody specifically. I heard a sound behind me, just a soft scuff of boot on rock, but it was enough. I spun around, my flashlight coming up at the same time, and found myself face to face with a third man. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-20s, with a thin face and cold eyes. He was wearing the same dark rain gear as the other two, and he was holding a gun. It was pointed directly at my chest. "You must be the ranger," he said calmly, like we were having a casual conversation. "Drop your weapon. Slowly." I calculated my options. He had the drop on me. I could try to draw, but I'd probably get shot. Better to comply, buy time, wait for an opening. I slowly reached for my weapon with 2 fingers, pulled it from the holster and set it on the ground. "Kick it away." I did. "Now the radio." I unclipped my radio and tossed it to the side. It landed with a crack against a rock. So much for backup. "Hands where I can see them." I raised my hands. "You don't want to do this. Attacking a federal officer is a serious crime. Whatever you're involved in, it'll only get worse." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think we're already well past worse, Ranger. Now, you're going to help me find someone. A man named Cody Lang. You've been looking for him too, haven't you?" "Why do you want him?" "That's not your concern. What is your concern is that if you don't help me find him, your situation is going to get very unpleasant very quickly. And if I do help you find him, what then? You just let me go?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Depends on how cooperative you are." I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. 3 attackers, not 2. Marcus hadn't seen this one, which meant he'd been somewhere else during the initial attack, maybe watching the road, or positioned as a lookout. This was organized, planned. "I don't know where he is," I said. "I've been searching just like you. But you're a ranger. You know this area. You know where someone would hide, so start thinking, because my patience is not unlimited." He gestured with the gun, indicating I should start walking. I moved slowly, buying time, trying to figure out a plan. He stayed several feet behind me, far enough that I couldn't rush him without getting shot. As we walked, I kept my eyes open for anything I could use as a weapon or a distraction. A loose rock, a sharp branch, anything. And then, in the distance, I heard something that changed everything. A voice, weak but clear, calling out, "Help! Somebody help me!" It was coming from somewhere ahead of us, deeper in the formations. The man behind me heard it too. He pressed the gun harder against my back. "Move! Now!" We headed toward the voice, and as we got closer I realized where it was coming from. There was a ravine up ahead. I'd seen it on my maps. It was narrow and deep, maybe 40 feet from top to bottom, with steep sides, and if someone had fallen into it. We reached the edge, and my captor shined his flashlight down. There, at the bottom, was Cody Lang. He was lying on his back, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. His face was pale, and there was blood on his jacket. A lot of blood. But he was alive, conscious, and looking up at us with desperate eyes. "Please," he called up weakly. "I need help. My leg. I think it's broken." The man behind me laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound. "Well, well. Looks like you did the hard part for us, Cody. Saved us the trouble of pushing you off a cliff ourselves. What do you want from me?" Cody's voice was thick with pain. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Don't you?" The man's voice was hard now. "Think about it, Cody. Think about what you did, what you saw." And suddenly I understood. This wasn't random violence. This was about something Cody had witnessed, something he knew. Something worth killing to keep secret. "I don't know what you're talking about," Cody called up. But I could hear the lie in his voice. He knew exactly what they were talking about. The man sighed. "Have it your way." He turned to me. "Here's what's going to happen, Ranger. You're going to climb down there and bring Cody back up. nice and easy. Any tricks, any attempts to escape, and I put a bullet in both of you. Clear?" I looked at the ravine. The sides were steep, but not quite vertical. I could probably climb down without rope, and if Cody's injuries weren't too severe, I might be able to help him back up. But what then? The moment we were both at the top, we'd be at this man's mercy, unless I could figure out something before then. "Clear," I said. "I'll need my gear. First aid kit at minimum." He considered this, then nodded. He pulled my pack off my back himself, rummaged through it, and tossed down the first aid kit. "Nothing else. Get moving." I started down the ravine. Climbing down into that ravine was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and not because of the physical difficulty. Every instinct I had was screaming at me that this was a trap, that once I was down there with Cody, we'd both be sitting ducks. But I didn't have a choice, not if I wanted both of us to survive. The descent took about 5 minutes. The rock was slick from the rain, and I had to test each handhold carefully before committing my weight to it. Above me, I could see the silhouette of my captor watching, his gun still trained on me. About halfway down, I heard voices. He was calling to his companions, telling them he'd found their target. When my feet finally touched the bottom of the ravine, I immediately went to Cody. He was in bad shape. The leg was definitely broken. I could see the unnatural angle even in the poor light. There was a deep gash on his left arm that was bleeding steadily, and his face was pale and clammy. Classic signs of shock setting in. "I'm Ranger Draper," I said quietly, opening the first aid kit. "Your friend Marcus is safe. He's in my vehicle. Help is coming." "Is it?" Cody's voice was bitter. "Because those guys up there seem pretty confident that we're not getting out of this. Let me worry about them. Right now, I need to stabilize your injuries." I pulled out gauze and began working on the arm wound. "Cody, I need to know what this is about. What did you see that made them come after you?" He was quiet for a moment. His jaw clenched against the pain as I wrapped his arm. Then he said, 3 days ago, Marcus and I were scouting camping spots in the park. We drove out to some of the more remote areas, taking photos, checking out trails. We ended up on one of those old mining roads, thought it would make for interesting pictures." "Go on." "We hiked up to this abandoned mining camp. Most of it was just ruins, but there was one building that was still partially intact, an old equipment shed or something, and there was a newer model pickup truck parked behind it. Which was weird, right? Why would someone have a new truck at an abandoned mining camp?" I kept working on his arm, but I was listening intently now. "What did you do?" "We should have just left. That would have been the smart thing. But Marcus was curious, wanted to get a photo of the truck with the old buildings, said it would make a good contrast shot. So we got closer, and that's when we heard the voices. Above us, I could hear movement. The other 2 men had arrived. 3 of them now, all watching us from the rim of the ravine. I had to keep Cody talking, had to buy time while I figured out a way out of this. "There were 3 men around back of that shed," Cody continued. "They had the truck's tailgate down, and they were unloading something. Duffel bags, heavy ones, from the way they were carrying them. And they were arguing about something. We couldn't hear all of it, but it was clear they were nervous in a hurry." "Did they see you?" "Not at first. Marcus got his photos, used the zoom, stayed hidden behind some rocks. But then I stepped on some loose gravel and it shifted, made noise. One of them looked right at us. We ran back to the Jeep, got out of there as fast as we could." "And you think they were doing something illegal? Drug running, maybe?" Cody shook his head. "That's what we thought at first. But then Marcus got home and looked at the photos on his computer. He zoomed in on one of the duffel bags. The angle was just right to see inside it. It wasn't drugs, Ranger. It was money. Stacks and stacks of cash. Money. That changed everything. Drug dealers might chase you off, might even threaten you, but they usually didn't organize elaborate hunting parties. But if we were talking about serious money, the kind that came from organized crime or worse, then people would absolutely kill to protect it. Did you go to the police? We talked about it. Marcus wanted to, but I convinced him to wait until after our camping trip. Stupid, I know. I don't know what I thought. That it wasn't our problem, maybe. That we'd just stay out of it. His voice broke. And now, look where we are. Hey, I said firmly, finishing with his arm and moving to examine his leg. You're still alive, so is Marcus. We're going to get through this. How? He gestured weakly toward the rim. They've got guns. You're unarmed. We're trapped down here. He was right, of course. But I'd been in tight situations before. You don't survive 8 years as a ranger in remote areas without learning how to think on your feet. I looked around the ravine more carefully. It was narrow, maybe 15 feet wide, and the walls rose steeply on both sides. But they weren't uniform. The rock was layered sediment, eroded over millions of years, creating a pattern of shelves and overhangs. And there, about 10 feet away, I noticed something, a shadow that was deeper than it should be. A gap in the rock face, a cave opening. Small, maybe, but potentially deep enough to provide cover. Cody, I said quietly, can you move at all? Even just drag yourself? Maybe. Why? Before I could answer, a voice called down from above. All right, Ranger, time's up. Send Cody up first, nice and slow. I looked up at them. All 3 men were visible now, silhouetted against the night sky. 2 of them had flashlights. The one who'd captured me still had his gun pointed down at us. I made a decision. He can't climb, I called up. His leg is broken. I'll need help getting him up. One of you needs to come down with a rope. There was a pause. Muttered conversation between them, then, nice try. You climb up first, then we'll figure out what to do with Cody. That won't work, I insisted. If I leave him, he could go into full shock. He might die before we get him out. You want him alive to find out what he did with those photos, don't you? Another pause. Longer this time. They were weighing options, trying to decide if I was telling the truth or playing for time. Finally, fine, but if you try anything, we start shooting. And Ranger, we'll aim for Cody first. I heard movement above. One of them was coming down. Good, that's what I needed. I moved closer to Cody, pretending to check his vitals, but I was actually looking at that cave opening. It was partially hidden by a small outcropping of rock, if we could get to it before they realized what we were doing. Listen to me very carefully, I whispered to Cody. In about 30 seconds, things are going to get loud and chaotic. When they do, I need you to drag yourself to that dark spot over there, that gap in the wall. Can you do that? He looked at me like I was crazy. What are you going to do? Something stupid, probably. Just trust me. I could hear the man descending the ravine wall. He was taking his time, being careful. Maybe 30 feet from the bottom. I needed to time this perfectly. I picked up a rock, a good-sized one, about the weight of a softball, and palmed it behind my back. Then I stood up and moved to the base of the wall as if I was preparing to help the descending man. He was 20 feet up. 15, 10. I waited until he was about 6 feet from the bottom, both hands occupied with climbing, before I made my move. I threw the rock, not at him, but at the man with the gun at the top of the ravine. It was a long shot, literally, but I had to try. The rock sailed up through the air and struck the gunman in the shoulder. It wasn't enough to seriously hurt him, but it surprised him, made him stagger back from the edge. His flashlight dropped and tumbled down into the ravine. In that moment of chaos, I grabbed a larger rock and threw it at the man on the wall. This one connected solidly with his side, and he lost his grip. He fell the last 6 feet, landing hard on the rocky ground with a pained grunt. "Go!" I yelled at Cody. "Move!" I didn't wait to see if he followed my instruction. I dove for the dropped flashlight, grabbed it, and ran for the cave opening. Behind me, I heard shouting from above, the sound of Cody dragging himself across the rocks, and the man I'd knocked down scrambling to his feet. I reached the cave opening and turned back. Cody was halfway to me, pulling himself along with his arms. The man from the wall was on his feet but disoriented, and from above, I could hear the other two trying to figure out what had just happened. "Shoot them," one voice yelled. "I don't have a clear shot." I dropped the flashlight and went back for Cody, grabbing him under the arms and pulling him the last few feet. A gunshot cracked, and I heard the bullet whine off the rock wall inches from my head. Chips of stone stung my face. We tumbled into the cave opening just as another shot rang out. This one was closer. I felt the air pressure change as it passed. The cave was shallow, maybe 10 feet deep, but the opening was narrow enough that we weren't exposed to direct fire from above. The man at the bottom of the ravine was the immediate threat. He was standing now, pulling something from his belt. Another gun. I grabbed the biggest rock I could lift with one hand and hurled it at him. It caught him in the leg, and he went down again with a curse. Not enough to stop him, but it bought us a few seconds. "Cody, how deep does this cave go?" "I don't know." He was breathing hard, his face twisted in pain. "Can't see." I grabbed the flashlight I'd dropped and shined it deeper into the cave. The rear wall appeared solid, no exit. We were trapped. But then I noticed something. The floor of the cave sloped downward slightly, and at the very back there was a crack in the stone. Not big, maybe 2 feet wide, but it looked like it went deeper than just the surface. "Can you fit through there?" I asked Cody, pointing. He looked at it, then at me. "Maybe, but what about you?" "I'll be right behind you. Go." He started dragging himself towards the crack. I positioned myself at the cave entrance, armed with rocks, ready to hold off anyone who tried to come in. The man at the bottom of the ravine was on his feet again, gun in hand, moving cautiously toward us. "It's over, Ranger," he called out. "You've got nowhere to go. Come out, and maybe we can work something out." "Work something out?" I shouted back. "You've been trying to kill us all night. Why would I believe anything you say?" "Because the alternative is dying in that cave. Think about it. We can wait you out. You've got no food, no water, no backup. Your radio is broken. Nobody knows where you are. Sooner or later, you'll have to come out." He was right about some of that, but he was wrong about the most important part. People did know where I was, or at least, they knew generally where I was. When I didn't check in, when Marcus reported that I'd gone looking for Cody, they'd send search and rescue. It might take hours, but they'd come. Unless these men decided to just execute us now and take their chances with disposing of the bodies. From behind me, I heard Cody's voice, muffled. "Ellen, there's something back here." I risked a glance over my shoulder. Cody had made it to the crack and was peering through it. "What is it?" "It's another chamber, bigger than this one, and I think there might be another way out." Hope flared in my chest. "Can you get through?" "I think so, but my leg—" "Just do it. I'll help you." I turned back to the entrance. The man was closer now, maybe 10 feet away, his gun raised. Behind him, I could see one of the others descending the ravine wall. They were going to rush the cave, overwhelm us with numbers. I had maybe 30 seconds. I grabbed Cody's good arm and helped pull him through the crack. It was tight. He had to turn sideways, and I could hear him gasping in pain as his broken leg scraped against the rock. But he made it through. I started to follow, squeezing myself into the narrow opening. I was smaller than Cody, so it was easier, but I had to contort my body at an awkward angle to fit. I was halfway through when I heard running footsteps behind me. They were coming. I pulled harder, ignoring the stone scraping against my ribs and back. My hips were through, just my legs left. Almost there. A hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked blindly, felt my boot connect with something solid. A pained grunt, and the hand released. I pulled myself the rest of the way through and tumbled into the second chamber. Cody had been right. This space was much larger, roughly circular, maybe 20 feet across, and there, on the far side, was another opening. Not a crack this time, but a proper passage, leading somewhere. "Come on," I said, helping Cody to his feet, or foot, rather. He leaned heavily on me as we hobbled toward the passage. Behind us, I could hear the men trying to squeeze through the crack. One of them was smaller, and I heard him curse as he scraped through. We had maybe 15 seconds before he was in the chamber with us. The passage was narrow, but navigable. We moved as fast as Cody's injury would allow, which wasn't very fast. I could hear pursuit behind us. One man, breathing hard, moving quickly. The passage twisted and turned, following some ancient fissure in the rock. In places, it was so narrow we had to turn sideways. In other places, it opened up enough for two people to walk abreast. I kept expecting it to dead end to trap us, but it kept going. And then, up ahead, I saw something that made my heart leap. A glimmer of light. Not artificial light, but the gray, pre-dawn light of approaching morning. The storm had passed, and day was breaking. The passage opened onto a narrow ledge on the side of a formation. Below us, maybe 20 feet down, was relatively flat ground. Above us, the sky was lightening from black to deep gray, and in the distance I could see lights. Vehicles. Search and rescue had arrived. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms. "Over here! We need help!" The man chasing us emerged from the passage. He had his gun raised, and for a moment I thought he was going to shoot us both. But then he saw the lights in the distance too, heard the faint sound of engines and voices. His face twisted in frustration, and he hesitated. That hesitation saved our lives. "Drop the weapon," a voice called from below. I looked down and saw two rangers at the base of the formation, their own weapons drawn. "Park Service, drop your weapon now." The man looked at me, at Cody, at the rangers below. He was calculating odds, trying to figure out if he could still salvage this. But there were too many witnesses now, too many people who would see him if he pulled that trigger. He lowered the gun slowly and set it on the ground. Then he raised his hands. "Get down on your knees," one of the rangers below ordered. "Hands behind your head." He complied, and within minutes, the rangers had climbed up and secured him. More help arrived. Paramedics, more rangers, even some sheriff's deputies. The whole operation had turned into a major incident scene. They got Cody stabilized and into an ambulance. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening. The paramedics wanted me to get checked out too. I had cuts and bruises all over, and I was hypothermic from being out in the storm all night. But I refused until I'd given my full statement. The other two suspects were apprehended about an hour later, trying to make it back to their vehicle. They'd left the Jeep and tried to flee on foot, but K9 units tracked them down. In the light of day, I got a good look at them for the first time. They weren't career criminals, as it turned out. They were security contractors, ex-military types who'd gone into private security work. They'd been hired to transport that money Cody and Marcus had seen, money that belonged to a drug trafficking organization operating out of Rapid City. When Cody and Marcus had stumbled onto their drop site, these three had panicked. They'd tracked down Cody's Jeep using the license plate Marcus had gotten in one of his photos, found out where they were camping, and decided to eliminate the witnesses before they could go to the police. It was a simple plan, and it almost worked. If the storm hadn't slowed them down, if Marcus hadn't escaped, if I hadn't responded to the call when I did, a lot of ifs. The federal authorities ended up getting involved. The money led to arrests throughout the trafficking network. Cody and Marcus both ended up in witness protection for a while, though I heard they eventually got to return to their normal lives. As for me, I spent 3 days in the hospital recovering from hypothermia and exhaustion. When I got back to work, there was a commendation in my file and a lot of media attention that I didn't particularly want. I became that ranger who rescued the campers and caught the criminals, which made for good publicity for the Park Service but didn't change much about my day-to-day life. I still do evening patrols. I still respond to emergency calls. And when storms roll in over the Badlands, I still remember that night. The rain, the darkness, the feeling of being hunted while trying to protect someone else. But I also remember something else. The way Cody Lang kept fighting despite his injuries. The way Marcus Bellamy had the courage to trust me when I found him. The way backup arrived just when we needed it most. The Badlands are harsh and unforgiving. The weather is unpredictable. The terrain is treacherous. And sometimes, as I learned that night, the most dangerous thing out here isn't the landscape or the wildlife, it's people. People who think they can get away with violence because they're far from civilization, far from consequences. People who forget that even in the most remote places, there are those of us who are watching, who are ready to respond, who won't let them turn our parks into hunting grounds. That night ended with arrests and justice served. But it could have ended very differently, and that's what keeps me vigilant, what makes me take every call seriously no matter how routine it seems. Because out here in the Badlands, under the vast sky with its unpredictable storms, you never know when a simple camping trip will turn into something that tests the limits of survival and courage. And you never know when the storm that comes at night will bring not just rain and wind, but a different kind of danger entirely. The thing about silence is that it's never really silent. Not out here in the Badlands, anyway. There's always wind, always the distant call of a bird, always the sound of your own breathing and heartbeat reminding you that you're alive. But radio silence, that's different. That's the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl and your gut tighten, because it means something has gone wrong. My name is Blake Holter, and I've been a ranger at Badlands National Park for 6 years, long enough to know that when someone's radio goes dead mid-transmission, you don't waste time wondering why. You go find them, long enough to have seen tourists with twisted ankles, dehydrated hikers who didn't bring enough water, photographers who ventured too close to unstable cliff edges, long enough to know the difference between a routine problem and something that sets off alarm bells in your head. It was early September, one of those perfect late summer days when the temperature sits in the low 70s and the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. The kind of day that reminds you why you chose this job in the first place, despite the modest pay and the occasional difficult visitor. I'd started my shift at 7 that morning, doing my usual routine, checking the visitor center, reviewing the day's scheduled tours, inspecting equipment, and making sure all the trail signs were in good condition after the previous night's windstorm. By 10, I was doing a routine patrol of the southern trails when I got the call that changed everything. "Holter, this is Base. We've got Nora Marin out on the Cathedral Wall Trail with a group of 8. She's supposed to check in every hour. Last check-in was at 0900, and we haven't heard from her since." The voice belonged to Sarah Chen, our dispatcher. She'd been with the Park Service for 15 years, and I could hear the concern in her tone. Sarah didn't panic easily. I glanced at my watch. It was 10:47, almost 2 hours since her last contact. That wasn't necessarily cause for alarm. Radios malfunction, people get distracted, batteries die. I'd seen it all, but Nora Marin wasn't the type to miss a check-in. She was one of our most experienced guides, a woman in her early 40s who knew the Badlands like most people know their own backyard. She'd been guiding here for 12 years, had survived a close call with a rattlesnake, had once navigated her group to safety through an unexpected hailstorm, and was known for her meticulous attention to protocol and safety procedures. Copy that, base. What was her last known position? She reported they were approximately 3 miles into the trail, near the junction with the old mining access road. Said the group was doing well, weather was clear, no issues. Her transmission was normal, no indication of any problems. I'm about 15 minutes from that junction. I'll head over and check it out. Copy. Keep us updated. And Blake? Sarah paused. Be careful out there. Something doesn't feel right about this. Understood. Halter out. I redirected my patrol vehicle toward the Cathedral Wall Trail, a moderately difficult 8-mile loop that took hikers through some of the park's most impressive formations. The trail was popular with guided groups because the terrain was challenging enough to be interesting, but not so dangerous that you needed technical climbing skills. It featured some of the best views in the park: towering spires of layered sediment, narrow passages between rock walls, and overlooks that stretched for miles across the eroded landscape. The drive took me along the main loop road and then onto a smaller access road that wound through the formations. The Badlands spread out around me in all their eroded glory, striped layers of sediment in shades of gray, tan, and rust, carved by millions of years of wind and water into shapes that looked more like alien architecture than natural landforms. Geologists loved this place because you could literally see the history of the planet written in the rock. Each layer told a story: ancient seabeds, volcanic ash deposits, the age of mammals, all stacked like pages in a book. I'd grown up in South Dakota, in a small town about 80 miles from here. As a kid, my father used to bring me to the Badlands on weekend camping trips. He was the one who first taught me to read the landscape, to understand what the different rock colors meant, to identify the fossils that occasionally emerged from eroding hillsides. When he died during my senior year of college, a sudden heart attack, no warning, I'd seriously considered dropping out. But my mother convinced me to finish, and after graduation, I'd applied to the Park Service. Being a ranger here felt like continuing a conversation with my father, walking the same trails we'd explored together. I parked at the trailhead and grabbed my pack, which contained the usual supplies: extra water, first aid kit, emergency beacon, rope, energy bars, a thermal blanket, and my handheld radio. I also checked my service weapon, standard procedure when heading out alone into backcountry, and started up the trail. The weight of the gun on my hip was something I'd never quite gotten used to. In 6 years, I'd only drawn it twice, both times for aggressive wildlife rather than human threats. The Cathedral Wall Trail earned its name from the towering formations that lined the path, spires and pinnacles that rose like the columns of some ancient church. Early settlers, many of them deeply religious, had seen these formations and been reminded of European cathedrals they'd never actually visited, but had heard described in sermons. The trail itself was well maintained but challenging, with steep inclines and sections where you had to navigate loose rock and narrow ledges. Park maintenance crews came through every 2 weeks during peak season to clear debris and mark any new hazards. I made good time, covering the first 3 miles in about 40 minutes. My legs were used to this kind of terrain. I ran these trails several times a week to stay in shape. I kept my radio on the frequency Nora would be using, calling out periodically. "Nora, this is Ranger Halter. Do you copy?" Nothing but static. "Nora Marin, if you can hear this, please respond. This is Ranger Halter on your frequency." Still nothing. Just the sound of wind and my own footsteps crunching on the trail. I passed a section where the trail narrowed between 2 high walls of striated rock. This was one of my favorite spots, The layers were particularly dramatic here, with bands of white volcanic ash contrasting against rust-red mudstone. A family of bighorn sheep sometimes grazed on the slopes above this section. I'd photographed them last month and sent the pictures to a wildlife biologist friend who was studying their movement patterns. I reached the junction where the trail intersected with the old mining access road. This was where Nora had reported from during her last check-in. I stopped and looked around, taking in the scene carefully. This was something they'd taught us in training. When you're searching for someone, you don't just look for the person. You look for signs, for evidence, for anything that seems out of place or unusual. The mining road was barely visible anymore, just a faint depression in the landscape, overgrown with prairie grass and eroded by decades of weather. It dated back to the 1920s when there had been small-scale mining operations in the area, all long since abandoned. The mines had been looking for gold mostly, though some had sought silver or copper. None of them had been particularly successful. The real mineral wealth was further west, in the Black Hills. These Badlands operations had been desperate ventures, last-ditch efforts by men who'd already failed elsewhere. Most had gone bust within a year or two. These days, most visitors didn't even know the road existed, unless they were looking at a detailed topographic map. It wasn't marked on the standard tourist maps, and we didn't advertise its existence. Partly, this was to preserve the wilderness character of the area, and partly because the old mine shafts posed safety hazards. Some had been officially sealed decades ago, but others remained open, hidden by brush or partially collapsed, dangerous to anyone who might stumble into them. I walked along the trail, looking for signs of Nora's group. It didn't take long to find them. Boot prints in the dusty sections of trail, lots of them, consistent with a group of 8 or 9 people. The prints were fresh, definitely from this morning. I could even identify different tread patterns. Hiking boots from various manufacturers, one pair of trail runners that seemed too light for this terrain, a pair of heavy-duty boots that probably belonged to someone who'd over-prepared for the hike. But what caught my attention was that the prints didn't continue along the main cathedral wall trail. Instead, they turned off onto the old mining road, heading northeast into an area that wasn't part of any maintained trail system. That was wrong. Fundamentally, procedurally wrong. Nora would never take a group off trail without good reason, and she certainly wouldn't do it without informing base. It violated every protocol we had. Guides were supposed to stick to designated trails unless there was an emergency that required deviation, and even then they were supposed to radio it in immediately. The protocols existed for good reasons: liability, safety, resource protection, and the simple fact that rescue operations became exponentially more difficult when people wandered into unmaintained wilderness. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Holter. I'm at the junction. I found evidence that Nora's group left the main trail and headed northeast on the old mining access road. Can you confirm if she reported any changes to her route?" Sarah's response came quickly. "Negative, Holter. No route changes reported. That area is unmaintained wilderness. She wouldn't take a civilian group in there, not unless something forced her to." "Copy that. I'm going to follow the tracks and see what I can find. We'll update in 15. Be careful, Blake. I'm going to start mobilizing search and rescue as a precaution." "Good call. Holter out." I started along the old mining road, following the boot prints. The road climbed gradually, winding between formations and occasionally offering views of the surrounding landscape. It was rougher than the maintained trails, with loose rock and sections where erosion had carved deep channels across the path. In some places, the original road was completely gone, reclaimed by nature. I had to use my knowledge of the terrain to figure out where it had once run. The vegetation changed as I moved into this area. More prairie grass, some scrubby cedar trees clinging to sheltered spots, patches of prickly pear cactus that you had to watch out for. I passed the bleached skull of a pronghorn antelope, picked clean by scavengers, the bone white and smooth in the sun. Death was part of the landscape here, as natural as the rock itself. About a quarter-mile in, I found something that made me stop. A radio. Nora's radio. I recognized it immediately by the bright yellow case she always kept it in, something she'd told me made it easier to find if she dropped it. Bright yellow, like a school bus, she'd said once, laughing. Hard to lose. The case was scuffed and dirty now, and when I picked it up, I saw that the antenna had been snapped off. Not bent, snapped, like someone had deliberately broken it or it had been damaged in a struggle. The power button was still in the on position, but the device was dead, either from the damage or a depleted battery. I examined the ground around where the radio had fallen. There were more boot prints here, clustered together like people had stopped and milled around. The dust was disturbed in a pattern that suggested confusion or commotion. And there was something else. A piece of paper, torn and dirty, partially buried in the dust. I picked it up carefully, holding it by the edges. It was a section of a topographic map, torn roughly from a larger sheet. The section showed this area of the park, with the mining road clearly marked. But what drew my attention were the handwritten markings on it. Someone had drawn a circle around a spot about 2 miles northeast of my current position, and next to the circle, in small cramped handwriting, were the words, "Old Mine Entrance, Abandoned 1920. The handwriting was masculine, angular, written with a ballpoint pen. Not Nora's writing. I'd seen her incident reports often enough to recognize her neat, flowing script. This was someone else's map, someone else's notation. Why would someone mark an old mine entrance on a map? And why would this map section be torn and discarded here, near Nora's broken radio? I was about to radio this in when I noticed something else on the ground. Footprints, but not the kind I'd been following. These were different, distinct from the clustered prints of the tour group. There were 2 distinct sets of prints separate from the larger group. One set was smaller, likely from a woman's hiking boot, size 7 or 8. The tread pattern was worn but still visible, looked like Merrill or Keen boots, the kind serious hikers wore. These prints moved in an erratic pattern, sometimes overlapping themselves, like the person wearing them had been pacing or circling, uncertain or agitated. The second set of prints was much larger and deeper. Heavy boots, size 12 at least, with an aggressive tread pattern that pressed deep into the soft earth. Whoever made these prints was big and carrying weight, or moving with purpose and force. The stride length was long, suggesting someone tall, probably over 6 feet. The depth of the impression suggested someone heavy, maybe 200 pounds or more. Both sets of prints led northeast, following the mining road in the direction of the circled location on the map. But here's what made my stomach tighten. The small prints and the large prints weren't walking together. The small prints had been there first, and the large prints came after, sometimes landing directly on top of the smaller ones, obliterating them. One person walking and another following. I took photos of everything with my phone, the radio from multiple angles, the map fragment, the footprints with my boot next to them for scale. Documentation was crucial. Whatever had happened here, whatever was still happening, these details might be important later. Then I tried to piece together what might have happened. Nora had been here with her group. Something had caused them to stop, maybe to rest, maybe because they'd seen something interesting, or maybe because they'd encountered someone. At some point, Nora's radio had been damaged and dropped. Whether she dropped it herself or someone else broke it, I couldn't tell. A piece of a marked map had been torn and left behind, possibly deliberately, possibly in a struggle. And then Nora, assuming the small prints were hers, which seemed likely given her size, had walked northeast, followed by someone in heavy boots. But where was the rest of her group? The 8 hikers she'd been guiding. Their prints continued along the main cluster, but they diverged from Nora's path. It looked like the group had gone one way while Nora went another. That didn't make any sense. A guide would never split off from their group, especially not in backcountry terrain. It was the cardinal rule of guiding. You stay with your people, always, no matter what, unless she'd been following someone, or been forced to. I keyed my radio again, my mind running through scenarios, none of them good. Base, Holter, situation is escalating. I found Nora's radio. It's damaged and non-functional. Also, found a marked map fragment indicating an old mine entrance about 2 miles northeast. I have footprints suggesting Nora may have separated from her group and proceeded in that direction, possibly with or following an unknown individual, requesting immediate backup and search and rescue. There was a pause before the response came. I could imagine Sarah processing this information, making rapid decisions, pulling up maps on her computer screen. Copy that, Holter. SAR is being mobilized. ETA to your location is approximately 45 minutes. What's your next move? I looked at the footprints leading northeast, disappearing around a bend in the old road. 45 minutes was a long time if Nora was in trouble, but going in alone without backup was against protocol, especially if there was potentially a dangerous individual involved. We'd had training on this exact scenario. Never pursue alone when there's a potential threat. Wait for backup. Establish a perimeter, approach with adequate force. But that training also emphasized that every situation was unique, that sometimes you had to make judgment calls based on circumstances. And right now, my gut was telling me that 45 minutes might be too long. I'm going to proceed along the tracks, I said. I'll be cautious and maintain radio contact. If I find Nora or her group, I'll assess the situation and call it in immediately. Holter, recommend you wait for backup. Sarah's voice was firm, but I could hear the conflict in it. She knew me well enough to know I was already making my decision. Noted. But if she's injured or in danger, 45 minutes could be critical. I'm proceeding. I'll stay in contact every 10 minutes. I didn't wait for a response. I started walking, following those 2 sets of prints, one small and erratic, one large and purposeful, as they led me deeper into the unmaintained wilderness of the Badlands. The terrain got rougher as I moved away from the main trail system. The old mining road deteriorated into barely more than a suggestion of a path, often disappearing entirely where erosion had reclaimed it. I had to navigate by memory and GPS, checking my position against the map fragment I'd photographed. The sun was higher now, beating down, and despite the moderate temperature I could feel sweat on my back. The landscape here was more dramatic, more raw than the tourist areas. The formations rose higher, their layers more pronounced. In some places, narrow passages barely wide enough for one person cut between towering walls of rock. In others, the land opened into small valleys where ancient seabeds had left perfectly flat expanses of cracked mud. The footprints remained visible for about half a mile, and then the ground became too rocky to hold clear impressions. But the general direction was consistent, northeast, climbing gradually into the formations. I continued on, using my knowledge of the terrain to follow the most logical path someone would take. I kept calling out as I walked, my voice echoing off the rock walls. "Nora, this is Ranger Holter. If you can hear me, please respond." My voice would carry far in this landscape, bouncing between formations. But all I heard in return was silence and the ever-present wind. After about 40 minutes of hiking, moving faster than was probably wise on this uncertain terrain, I crested a ridge and found myself looking down into a narrow valley. The formations rose steeply on both sides, creating a claustrophobic corridor maybe 50 feet wide and 100 yards long. And there, at the far end of the valley, partially hidden by an overhang of rock, I saw it. A dark opening in the cliff face. The old mine entrance from the map. Even from this distance, I could see that the entrance was larger than I'd expected. Probably had been a fairly substantial operation for its time. The opening was roughly rectangular, clearly man-made, carved into the sedimentary rock. I approached carefully, all my senses on high alert. The valley floor was covered in loose rock and sparse vegetation. My footsteps seemed loud in the confined space. The wind whistled through the corridor with an eerie sound that made me think of the stories old-timers told about these abandoned mines being haunted by the ghosts of failed prospectors. The entrance was about 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, reinforced with rotting timber supports that looked like they hadn't been maintained since the 1920s. The wood was gray with age, cracked and splitting, held together more by memory than structural integrity. A faded, danger, no entry sign hung crookedly from one of the supports, the red paint barely visible after decades of weathering. And on the ground in front of the entrance, trampled into the dust, were more footprints, lots of them. The small prints and the large prints, yes, but also the clustered prints of what looked like several people, the tour group. The group had been here, or was still here. I drew my weapon and held my flashlight alongside it, a technique we'd trained for situations where you might encounter threats in low light. The modified Weaver stance, they called it. Flashlight and gun hand working together. Then I called out one more time, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "This is Park Ranger Blake Holter. Is anyone in there? Nora, if you're in there, I need you to respond." For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the wind and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, faint and echoing from deep within the mine, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A scream, high-pitched, terrified, and unmistakably human. It lasted only a second or two before being cut off abruptly. It was followed by the sound of running footsteps, getting closer, echoing off the mine walls in a way that made it hard to judge distance. I braced myself, weapon raised, flashlight pointed at the mine entrance, every muscle in my body tense and ready. My training kicked in, finger alongside the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. Identify your target before you shoot. Be prepared for anything. A figure burst out of the darkness of the mine, running full speed, stumbling over rocks and nearly falling. In the bright sunlight, after the darkness of the mine interior, I had to blink to focus. It was a woman, young, maybe early 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had come half undone. Her face was twisted in terror, eyes wide and wild. She was wearing hiking clothes, lightweight pants and a performance fabric shirt that were torn and filthy, covered in rock dust and what looked like dried blood on one sleeve. She saw me and screamed again, this time in what seemed like relief. "Ranger! Thank God! You have to help us! He's got them trapped inside! He's crazy! He has a gun!" I holstered my weapon immediately and caught her as she nearly collapsed, her legs giving out from exhaustion and fear. She grabbed onto my uniform shirt, her hands shaking. "Slow down," I said, keeping my voice calm and authoritative. "What's your name? What happened?" "Jessica. Jessica Thorne. I was part of the tour group with Nora. We were just hiking and then this man appeared and he had a gun and he made us go into the mine and then he—" Her words tumbled out in a rush, barely coherent. "Who made you? Who's in there? Tell me exactly what happened." She took a gasping breath, trying to calm herself enough to speak clearly. "I don't know his name. He just appeared on the trail, said we shouldn't be there, that we'd seen something we shouldn't have. He had a gun, a pistol. He said if we didn't do what he wanted, he'd shoot someone. Nora tried to talk to him, tried to reason with him, but he just got angrier. He made us walk here, made us go into the mine. Nora tried to fight him, and he hit her with the gun, right across the face. There was so much blood. Another sound from the mine cut her off. This time, it was a man's voice, loud and angry, shouting something I couldn't make out. The words echoed and distorted as they bounced off the mine walls. And then, a gunshot. The crack of the gunfire echoed through the valley like a thunderclap, reverberating off the rock walls and fading into a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. Birds that had been roosting in crevices in the formations took flight, their wings beating frantically. Jessica flinched in my arms, and I could feel her whole body trembling, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Was that inside the mine?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. My mind was already running through protocols, calculating options, assessing threats. She nodded frantically, her ponytail bobbing. "He's crazy, completely crazy. He keeps saying we saw something we shouldn't have seen, that we can't be allowed to leave, that will ruin everything." Nora tried to reason with him, told him we didn't see anything, that we'd just gotten lost, but he just got angrier and angrier. I guided Jessica away from the mine entrance behind a large boulder that would provide cover. The boulder was probably 10 feet tall, solid sandstone, would stop bullets if it came to that. "Listen to me carefully. How many people are still inside?" 7. Nora and 6 from the tour group. There were 8 of us tourists total. I managed to slip away when he was focused on them. He was forcing them deeper into the mine, saying he needed time to think, time to figure out what to do with us. "When did this start? How long have you been in there?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe 2 hours? We were just on the trail following Nora. The tour was going great. She was telling us about the geology, about how the different layers formed. Then we came to this junction and he was just standing there, this big guy in work clothes. At first we thought he was another ranger or something, but then he pulled out the gun." "Describe him. Everything you remember." Jessica closed her eyes, clearly trying to focus through her fear. "Tall, maybe 6'2", 6'3", heavy build, like he works construction or something. Dark hair, receding a little. Maybe late 30s. He was wearing work clothes, dirty jeans, a plaid shirt, heavy boots, and he kept talking about his truck, about us seeing his truck, but I don't remember seeing any truck." "Did he say his name?" "No," Nora asked, but he wouldn't say. He just kept saying we'd ruined everything. I needed more information. "Okay, the gunshot. Did you see what happened? Is someone hurt?" "I don't know. I was already running by then. I hid in a side passage while he was pushing everyone deeper, and then I just ran for it. I thought he might shoot me in the back, but I couldn't stay in there." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I just couldn't." "You did the right thing. Listen to me, Jessica. I need you to stay here behind this rock. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Don't come out until you hear me call for you specifically, okay? Help is coming, but I need you to stay hidden and safe, understand?" She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You can't go in there alone. He has a gun. He'll shoot you. He's not thinking straight." "It's my job," I said simply. "And right now, I'm the only help those people have. Stay here." I moved back toward the mine entrance, my mind racing through tactical options. This was a hostage situation now, which meant it was way above my pay grade. The proper protocol was to establish a perimeter, wait for specialized units, hostage negotiators, tactical response teams, maybe even FBI if this crossed certain thresholds. Going in alone was exactly what I shouldn't do. Every training manual, every protocol document, every piece of advice from veteran rangers said the same thing. Don't be a hero. Wait for proper support. But that gunshot changed the calculation. If someone was injured or dying in there, waiting wasn't an option. The closest tactical team was probably 3 hours away. SAR was still 30 minutes out, and they weren't equipped for hostage rescue anyway. I keyed my radio, keeping my voice low. "Base, this is Holter. Situation critical. I have confirmation of an armed suspect holding 7 individuals hostage inside the old mine at my location. At least 1 shot fired. 1 civilian has escaped, Jessica Thorne, early 20s, unharmed but traumatized. I'm going to attempt to establish communication with the suspect. Advise all responding units we have an active shooter situation." The response was immediate and tense. Sarah's voice was tight with concern. "Holter, do not engage. Wait for tactical support. ETA is now 20 minutes. 20 minutes. An eternity when someone might be bleeding out in that mine. An eternity for a hostage taker to make a fatal decision. Copy that, Base. I'm not engaging, just establishing dialogue. Need to determine if there are casualties. Holter out." Before she could respond further, I switched off the radio. I knew Sarah would be furious, knew this could cost me my job if things went wrong. But right now, 7 people in that mine needed someone to act. I approached the mine entrance cautiously, staying to one side where I'd have cover if he started shooting. The entrance was partially shielded by the rock overhang, which would make it hard for him to get a clear shot at me from inside. Then I called out, projecting my voice to carry into the darkness while keeping my weapon drawn and ready. "This is Park Ranger Blake Holter. I'm here to help. Nobody wants anyone to get hurt. Can you hear me?" Silence. Just the sound of wind and the creaking of those old timber supports. Then, from deep in the mine, echoing in a way that made it hard to judge distance, a man's voice called back. "Stay out there, Ranger. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I will if I have to. I'm not going to prison. I'm not losing everything." The voice was strained, almost desperate. Not the voice of a hardened criminal, but the voice of someone on the edge, someone pushed too far. "I understand. Nobody wants anyone to get hurt. Can you tell me your name?" I kept my tone even, non-threatening, the way they'd taught us in the crisis intervention training I'd taken 2 years ago. Another pause. Why does my name matter? Because I'd like to know who I'm talking to. My name's Blake. I've been a ranger here for 6 years. I know this park, I know these mines, I want to help you. But I can't help if I don't know who you are. Silence again. Longer this time. I could hear voices inside, muffled and indistinct. Then, "Help me?" The voice was bitter, almost laughing. "You can't help me. Nobody can help me now. It's too late. They saw it. They saw everything." What did they see? Help me understand what happened here. The truck, the equipment. They saw it all. They weren't supposed to be on that trail. I told her. I came out, I waved them off, told them the trail was closed for maintenance. But she didn't listen. His voice rose with frustration. She said they had permission to be there. She had a permit or something. And then one of them saw my truck parked off the road and they started asking questions. "Why is there a truck here? What are you doing? Let me take a picture of that equipment." I was starting to piece together a picture. This wasn't a random attack. This was someone who'd been doing something out here. Something illegal, probably. And Nora's group had stumbled onto it. "What were you doing that they saw?" I asked. Help me understand. What kind of equipment did they see? I was doing a job, just doing what I was paid to do. And now... His voice cracked slightly. Now everything's ruined. They saw the truck, they saw the surveying equipment, the drilling samples. One of them even took pictures with their phone. I can't let that information get out. I can't. Do you understand? This was supposed to save me. This was supposed to fix everything. I hear you. You were working on something important. But right now, we need to make sure everyone stays safe. Can you tell me if everyone in there is okay? I heard a gunshot. Is anyone hurt? No answer. I tried a different approach. Listen, whatever you're involved in, whatever happened, we can work through it. But the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for everyone. Right now, you haven't seriously hurt anyone, right? Right now, we can still walk back from this. But if someone dies in there, there's no walking back. You understand what I'm saying? Someone already got hurt. The voice was anguished now, the desperation clear. I didn't mean to. The gun went off. One of them tried to grab it and it just went off. I didn't mean to shoot anyone. My stomach dropped. Textbook accident during a struggle, which meant someone was probably seriously injured. Who got hurt? Was it Nora? No, one of the tourists, a man. I think his name was David. He tried to be a hero, tried to grab the gun, and it went off. He's bleeding bad, really bad. We tried to stop it, but there's so much blood. Then let me help him. Let me come in there and give him medical attention. I have training. I have supplies. Let me save his life. I kept my voice urgent, but not aggressive. You don't want anyone to die, do you? You said you didn't mean to shoot him, so let me help. How do I know you won't try something? How do I know there aren't a dozen cops out there ready to storm in? Because I'm a park ranger, not a tactical officer. I'm not trained for combat situations. I'm trained to help people in the wilderness. That's all I want to do. Help David and help you get out of this situation alive. You can see I'm alone. Have you heard any vehicles, any helicopters? It's just me out here, just me trying to help. A long silence. I could hear murmuring from inside the mine. Multiple voices, though I couldn't make out words. He was talking to the hostages, maybe debating his options, maybe asking their opinion. That was potentially good. It meant he was still rational enough to communicate, to consider options. Finally, all right, but just you. No tricks. Leave your gun and radio outside where I can see them. And come slow, with your hands up. I see any kind of weapon, anyone else trying to come in, and people start dying. You understand me? I understand completely. I'm going to set down my weapon and radio right now. I looked back at Jessica, who was watching from behind the boulder with wide, frightened eyes. I held up a hand, signaling her to stay put and stay quiet. Then I removed my service weapon, a Glock 22, standard Park Service issue, and set it on a flat rock near the entrance, clearly visible. I did the same with my radio, placing it next to the gun. I kept my flashlight. I'd need that to see in the dark, and my first aid kit, which was a red nylon bag with a white cross on it, obviously medical supplies. "I'm coming in," I called out. "I've left my weapon and radio outside like you asked. I'm just bringing a flashlight and medical supplies. I'm moving slow, hands up where you can see them." I raised my hands, the flashlight in one and the first aid kit in the other, and took a breath. This was it. I was committing to a course of action that could save lives or end my own. I thought briefly of my mother, of how devastated she'd be if something happened to me. Then I pushed the thought away and stepped into the darkness of the mine. The temperature dropped immediately as I stepped from the bright September sunshine into the cool darkness. The entrance tunnel was roughly hewn from the rock, the walls still bearing the marks of the picks and tools that had carved them nearly a century ago. The rotting timber supports creaked ominously overhead, and I could see where sections of the ceiling had partially collapsed over the decades, leaving piles of rubble that had been pushed to the sides. The air smelled of earth and dampness, with an underlying odor of decay, probably from animal droppings or the wooden supports rotting. My eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness as I moved forward. the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom and revealing details. Old mining equipment rusted beyond recognition, sections of rail track where ore cars had once run, ancient tools that had been abandoned when the mine shut down. "I'm coming forward," I called out. "Still just me, still unarmed. Where are you? Keep coming. Straight ahead, then turn left when the tunnel splits." I moved carefully, testing each step before committing my weight to it. The floor was uneven, covered in rock debris and what looked like decades of accumulated dust and sediment. In some places, water had seeped through the ceiling and created mineral deposits that sparkled in my flashlight beam. In others, the floor had subsided or been washed away by ancient underground streams. The tunnel ran straight for maybe 50 feet before splitting. To the right, I could see that the passage was partially collapsed, impassable. To the left, the tunnel continued into darkness. I took the left turn and kept moving. "I'm turning left now. I called out. "Still coming forward." As I rounded the corner, the passage opened into a larger chamber. This had probably been a working area where ore was sorted or equipment stored. The ceiling was higher here, maybe 12 feet, supported by heavier timber beams. The chamber was roughly circular, about 30 feet across, and several tunnel openings led off from it in different directions, probably exploratory shafts that had been dug to follow different seams. And there, in the beam of my flashlight, I saw them. 6 people huddled against the far wall, 5 tourists and Nora Marin. They were dirty, frightened, and clearly exhausted. One of them, a middle-aged man in hiking clothes, was lying on the ground with his hands pressed to his side. Even from across the chamber, I could see blood seeping between his fingers, dark and glistening in the flashlight beam. His face was pale, his breathing shallow and rapid, classic signs of shock. Standing between me and them, holding a pistol that shook slightly in his hand, was a man I'd never seen before. He matched Jessica's description perfectly. Tall, probably 6'2", heavy build, dark hair receding at the temples, late 30s, wearing dirty work clothes and heavy boots. His face was drawn with stress and fear, and I could see sweat on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the mine. His eyes were wide, the whites visible all around the irises, a sign of extreme stress. But what caught my attention most was the equipment scattered around the chamber. This wasn't historical mining equipment left over from the 1920s. This was modern gear, a portable generator, battery-powered lights, drilling equipment, core sample tubes, a laptop computer sitting on a makeshift table made from old crates, and what looked like assay equipment for testing rock samples. Someone had been actively working in here, and recently. "That's close enough," he said, gesturing with the gun. His hand was shaking badly, which made me more nervous than if he'd been holding it steady. An unstable hand on a trigger was dangerous. "Put the light on the ground and step to the side." I did as he said, setting my flashlight down so its beam illuminated the chamber without shining directly in anyone's eyes. In the diffused light, I could see more details now. Nora had a nasty bruise developing on her left cheek, probably from where he'd hit her with the gun. The other hostages looked terrified but uninjured, except for David, who was clearly in bad shape. "You're a prospector," I said, understanding clicking into place as I looked at the equipment. "You've been mining in here, looking for minerals." "Not mining. Surveying, checking deposits, taking samples." He said it defensively, like the distinction mattered. "It's not illegal to survey public land." "It is on federal parkland without permits," I said, keeping my voice neutral and non-judgmental. "But that's not important right now. What's important is getting David medical attention. May I approach him?" The man hesitated, his gun wavering between me and the hostages. I could see him struggling with the decision. Finally, he nodded, slow. "Keep your hands where I can see them, and don't try anything. I'm watching you." I moved across the chamber to where David lay, keeping my hands visible, moving slowly and deliberately. Up close, he looked worse than I'd thought. He was conscious, but barely, his face gray and slicked with sweat. I knelt beside him and gently moved his hands away from the wound. The bullet had entered his right side, below the ribs, probably around the area of his liver. There was a lot of blood. His shirt was soaked with it, and a dark pool had spread on the rocky floor beneath him. But the bleeding wasn't arterial. If it had been, he'd already be dead. Still, this was serious. Without proper medical attention soon, he could bleed out internally. "David, I'm Blake. I'm a ranger. I'm going to help you, okay?" I spoke directly to him, making eye contact, trying to keep him focused and aware. He nodded weakly. "Hurts," he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "Hurts so much." "I know it does, I know. But you're tough, okay? You're going to make it through this. Just stay still and let me work." I opened my first aid kit and pulled out gauze pads, compression bandages, and a thermal blanket. The wound needed proper surgical attention. He needed to be in an operating room, not an abandoned mine shaft, but I could at least slow the bleeding and treat for shock. As I worked, I talked, keeping my voice calm and steady. This served two purposes. It kept David calm and focused, and it helped establish a rapport with the gunman. "You're doing great, David. The bullet went through soft tissue. Probably nicked something, but it's not immediately fatal. You're going to be fine, but we need to get you to a hospital soon." I applied pressure to the wound, packed it with gauze, and wrapped it tightly with compression bandages. David groaned in pain but didn't move. I elevated his legs slightly using my backpack, trying to improve blood flow to his vital organs, and covered him with the thermal blanket to combat shock. Behind me, I could hear Nora's voice, quiet but firm. "Blake, is there backup coming?" "Yes, soon." I didn't look away from David's wound. Maintaining focus on the medical emergency helped keep things calm, kept the gunman from feeling directly threatened. "Don't believe him!" The gunman's voice was shrill now, panic creeping in. "He's stalling. They're probably surrounding this place right now. Tactical teams, snipers, the whole thing." "They're not," I said, still not looking at him, still working on David. "They're still 20 minutes out, maybe more. This mine is in a remote location. It takes time to mobilize units and get them here. And tactical teams? Those are based in Rapid City. They're probably 3 hours away minimum. Right now, it really is just me out here trying to help." "Tactical units?" He laughed, but it was the laugh of someone on the edge of breaking. See, they are bringing tactical units. They're treating me like a terrorist, all because I found something valuable and wanted to secure my claim before." He cut himself off abruptly, but he'd said enough. This wasn't just about illegal surveying. He'd found something in these abandoned mine shafts, something valuable enough to risk mining on federal land, and valuable enough to take hostages when he was discovered. "You found a new deposit," I said, finishing bandaging David and slowly standing up, turning to face him for the first time. "Not just traces, an actual significant deposit of something. Gold, silver, rare earth elements." He stared at me, his jaw working, clearly debating whether to answer. Finally, "Rare earths, specifically neodymium and dysprosium. The preliminary samples showed concentrations way higher than anything that's been found in this region before. Do you know what that means? Do you know how valuable that is?" I did, actually. Rare earth elements were critical for modern electronics, electric vehicles, wind turbines, military applications. China controlled most of the world's supply, and finding a significant domestic source would be worth millions, possibly billions. "So you found this deposit in the old mine shafts," I said, piecing it together. And you've been quietly surveying it, taking samples, trying to establish the extent of the find before filing official claims. Before someone else found it, he corrected. Before the government seized it, before some corporation bought up the rights for pennies and made billions while I got nothing. I found it, me. I put in the work, I took the risks, I made the discovery, and I was this close. He held up his thumb and forefinger nearly touching, to having everything documented, everything ready to file proper claims through back channels before it became public knowledge. But you don't have a legal claim to anything on parkland, I said gently. You know that, right? This is federal property. Even if you found a mountain of pure neodymium, you can't legally mine it or claim it. The law is wrong. His voice rose, echoing off the stone walls. I put in months of work. I spent every penny I had on equipment, on surveys, on assays. I was going to use this to get out of debt, to save my business, to prove to my wife that I wasn't a failure. And now you're going to what? Arrest me? Prosecute me? Take away everything I've worked for while the government sells the mining rights to some corporation that didn't do any of the work? I could see the desperation in his eyes, the kind of desperation that comes from someone who's gambled everything on one final chance and watched it slip away. Dangerous desperation. What's your name? I asked again, softer this time. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw his shoulders sag slightly. Some of the manic energy seemed to drain out of him. Carl Dexter. Carl, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I kept my voice steady, authoritative, but not aggressive. Right now, you're looking at federal charges for illegal mining, trespassing, weapons violations. Serious charges, yes. But if we end this now, if you let these people go, if David survives and receives proper medical care, you're probably looking at a few years at most. Maybe less with a good lawyer, and if you cooperate. A few years, he said bitterly. A few years in federal prison. Everything I own sold to pay legal fees. My wife already left. She'll never come back after this. My business is already bankrupt. What's the point? The point is that you'll be alive, Carl. You'll have a chance to rebuild, to start over. But if someone dies here, if David bleeds out because you won't let us get him to a hospital, you're looking at murder charges. Federal murder charges. That's life in prison, possibly death penalty depending on the prosecutor. Is any mineral deposit worth that? Is it worth spending the rest of your life in a cell or strapped to a gurney with needles in your arms? His hand was shaking worse now, the gun wavering. You don't understand. This was supposed to save me. I'm drowning in debt. Hundreds of thousands in debt. My construction business failed. My wife left and took everything. I had nothing left except this one chance, this one discovery. And now it's gone. Everything's gone. I could see tears forming in his eyes. This was someone in crisis, someone who'd reached the end of their rope and didn't see a way forward. The most dangerous kind of situation. Carl, I know it feels that way. I know it feels like there's no way out. But think about what you're doing. You've got good people here. Nora, these tourists who have families, who have lives. David over there has a wife and 3 kids. They're probably at home right now, not knowing what's happened, hoping Daddy comes home from his vacation. You don't want to be responsible for destroying their lives, do you? Behind Carl, I could see Nora slowly moving, shifting her position slightly. She caught my eye, and I gave the tiniest shake of my head. Don't try anything. Not yet. I didn't mean for any of this, Carl said, his voice breaking. I just panicked when they saw my truck. I thought if I could just keep them here until dark, I could move my equipment, and they wouldn't be able to prove anything. Nobody would believe them. But then that one guy started taking pictures with his phone, and the woman, he gestured at Nora, started asking about permits, saying she was going to report this, and I just panicked. I understand. You made some bad decisions in a moment of stress. We all do that sometimes, but you can stop making bad decisions right now. Put the gun down. Let these people go. Let me get David to a hospital. You can walk out of here on your own feet, and we can work through this legally. You're not a bad person, Carl. You're just someone in a bad situation who made some mistakes. They'll destroy me in court. The prosecutor will want to make an example. Maybe, I said honestly, but you'll be alive. You'll have a chance to tell your story, to explain the circumstances. You'll have a chance to rebuild your life after you serve your time. That's more than you'll have if you keep going down this path. If someone dies here, there's no coming back from that, you understand? I could see him wavering, the internal battle playing out on his face. The gun lowered slightly, and for a moment, I thought he was going to comply. I thought we were going to resolve this peacefully. Then we heard it, the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines and voices calling out from outside the mine. Backup had arrived early. They must have pushed hard to get here, sensing the urgency of the situation. Carl's face went white, then flushed with anger and fear. You lied. You said they were 20 minutes out. You lied to me. I didn't know they'd get here this fast, I started, but he cut me off. Liar! He raised the gun again, this time pointing it directly at Nora. His hand was shaking badly, his finger on the trigger. You're all liars, all of you. This was a setup. You were stalling while they surrounded the place. Carl, please, that's not... Everybody up, now! We're going deeper into the mine. Move, move! The hostages scrambled to their feet, terrified. Nora helped David up, though he groaned in pain and could barely stand. She supported him with one arm around his waist, his blood soaking into her shirt. Carl waved the gun frantically, herding them toward a passage at the back of the chamber that led deeper into the mine system, into tunnels that probably hadn't been explored in decades. I had seconds to make a decision. Let them go deeper, into unstable tunnels that might collapse, where rescue would be even harder, where David might not survive. Or try to stop Carl now, while I had a chance. Every instinct told me that if they went deeper into that mine, some of them wouldn't come back out. I calculated the distance between us, maybe 12 feet. Carl's attention was divided, focused on hurting the hostages. His gun hand was shaking. He wasn't trained, wasn't a professional. In his current state of panic, I might have one chance. I made my decision. I launched myself at him. My tackle caught him mid-step, and we both went down hard on the rocky floor. The impact drove the air from my lungs, and I felt rock scrape against my shoulder, tearing my uniform shirt. The gun flew from Carl's hand and skittered across the chamber, clattering against the stone wall. We grappled, rolling across the uneven floor. Carl was bigger than me, heavier, and his desperation gave him strength he shouldn't have had. He got a hand on my throat and squeezed, his thumb pressing into my windpipe. Stars burst in my vision. I drove my elbow into his ribs, once, twice, putting all my strength into it. I felt something give, maybe a rib cracking, and his grip loosened. I twisted away, gasping for air, and scrambled for the gun. My fingers closed around it just as Carl grabbed my ankle and yanked hard. I went down again, the gun sliding from my grip. Carl lunged for it, and we were both scrambling across the rock floor, fighting for control of the weapon. I got there first, my hand closing around the grip, but Carl was on top of me, trying to wrench it away. "Let go! Let go!" He was screaming, his face inches from mine, spittle flying. Instead, I brought my knee up hard into his stomach. He grunted, his grip weakening, and I shoved him off me. I rolled to the side and came up with the gun, breathing hard, pointing it at him as he lay on the floor. "Don't move! It's over, Carl! It's over!" He was clutching his stomach where I'd kneed him, blood running from his nose where he'd hit it on the rock floor during our struggle. He looked up at me, and I saw something break in his eyes. The fight went out of him all at once. He slumped against the wall and tears began streaming down his face, mixing with the blood. "It's over," he said quietly, his voice hollow. "Everything's over. My life is over." I kept the gun trained on him, my hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "Stay where you are, don't move." I called out toward the entrance, my voice hoarse from where he'd choked me. "Federal Ranger, Blake Holter. I have the suspect contained. One injured civilian needs immediate medical attention. Send in the EMTs. It's safe to approach." Within minutes, the chamber was flooded with people. Tactical officers in full gear, EMTs with medical equipment, other rangers including Sarah, who looked both relieved and furious when she saw me. They secured Carl in handcuffs, stabilized David for transport on a stretcher, and began evacuating the other hostages. The EMTs worked on David with professional efficiency, starting an IV, administering pain medication, preparing him for the difficult journey out of the mine. "You did good work on this bandaging," one of them told me. "Probably saved his life." Nora stopped next to me on her way out, her face pale but composed, despite the bruise darkening her cheek. She reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "Thank you, Blake. If you hadn't come in here, if you hadn't stopped him—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "It's my job," I said, echoing what I'd told Jessica earlier. But we both knew it was more than that. It was about making the choice to walk into danger when people needed help, even when protocol said to wait. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," she said quietly. "Or the stupidest. I haven't decided which." I managed a weak smile. Probably both. They led Carl out in handcuffs, his head down, shoulders slumped. As he passed me, he stopped and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for all of it. I didn't know what else to do." "I know," I said. And I did. I'd seen it in his eyes, in his desperation. He wasn't evil, just broken. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it. After everyone had been evacuated and the mine was being secured as a crime scene, I stood outside in the late afternoon sun, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the warmth on my face. My throat hurt where Carl had choked me. My shoulder was scraped raw from the rock floor. But I was alive, and so was everyone else. Sarah approached me, her expression unreadable. "That was the most irresponsible, protocol-breaking, career-endangering thing you've ever done." "I know. You went in alone, against an armed suspect. You turned off your radio. You engaged in physical combat without backup." "I know." She paused, then, "You also probably saved 7 lives today. The review board is going to have a field day with this, but—" She shook her head. "Good work, Holter. Stupid, but good." Later, after I'd given my preliminary statement and been checked by the EMTs, I walked back along the old mining road toward where I'd left my vehicle. The sun was setting now, painting the Badlands in shades of orange and purple, the layers of sediment glowing in the golden light. I thought about the footprints I'd found. One set small, one set large, both heading in the same direction. At the time, I'd thought it was pursuit, someone following someone else with sinister intent. But maybe it was something else. Maybe it was just 2 people's paths converging. 2 people who'd made different choices that led to the same place. Nora had chosen to guide her tour group, to share her love of this landscape with visitors. Carl had chosen to mine illegally, to gamble everything on one desperate chance to salvage his failing life. Their paths had crossed, and the result had been chaos and violence and near tragedy. The thing about the Badlands is that it's an honest place. The rock doesn't lie about its history. Every layer, every erosion pattern tells a story about what happened here over millions of years. The landscape doesn't hide its truth. You can read the history of the planet in the striated cliffs, see the evidence of ancient seas and volcanic eruptions, and the slow, patient work of wind and water. But people do hide their truths. People hide their intentions, their desperation, their mistakes. Carl had hidden his illegal mining operation. I'd hidden my own uncertainty when I walked into that mine, projecting confidence I didn't entirely feel. And sometimes, in places as remote and honest as the Badlands, those hidden truths come out in ways that no one expects. That night, back at the station, I filed my detailed report. David made a full recovery after surgery in Rapid City. The bullet had nicked his liver but hadn't caused irreparable damage. The other hostages were traumatized but physically unharmed. All of them would need counseling, would carry psychological scars from their ordeal, but they would survive. Carl Dexter was charged with federal crimes including kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, illegal mining operations on federal land, and weapons violations. The investigation revealed he'd found significant deposits of rare earth elements in the old mine. Valuable, but not valuable enough to justify what he'd done. The government seized his equipment and samples. His preliminary testing had been accurate. There were substantial quantities of neodymium and dysprosium in those old shafts, but extracting them would have required permits, environmental studies, and corporate backing that Carl could never have obtained. His wife filed for divorce while he was awaiting trial. He pleaded guilty to most charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, 23 years in federal prison with possibility of parole after 15. His lawyer argued for leniency based on his mental state and desperate circumstances, but the prosecutor pushed hard, wanting to make an example. In the end, Carl got more than the few years I'd suggested in the mine, but less than life. I attended the sentencing hearing. Carl looked smaller somehow, diminished by his orange jumpsuit and the weight of what he'd done. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he stood and apologized to each hostage by name, his voice breaking. He didn't make excuses. He just said he was sorry over and over. Nora took a month off before returning to guiding, and when she came back, she made sure to keep her radio charged, her check-ins regular, and her groups strictly on maintained trails. She never led another tour past that junction with the old mining road. Some paths, she told me later, were better left unexplored. As for me, I learned something that day about the nature of silence. Radio silence isn't just the absence of communication. It's the presence of something wrong, something that needs to be answered. It's a void that demands to be filled, a question that requires a response. And when that silence comes, when you hear that absence where there should be a voice, you don't hesitate. You don't wait for perfect conditions, or ideal backup, or the right equipment. You go find out what's wrong, and you do whatever it takes to make it right, because on the other side of that silence are people who need help. That's what being a ranger means, not just enforcing regulations or maintaining trails or giving directions to tourists. It means being the person who walks toward danger when everyone else walks away. It means making hard choices in moments of crisis. It means being willing to put yourself between innocent people and harm, even when the protocols say to wait, even when the smart move is to stay safe, even if it means walking into a dark mine to face an armed man, because on the other side of that silence are 7 people who need someone to answer the call. The review board did eventually hold a hearing about my actions that day. I was formally reprimanded for violating protocol by engaging without backup, and commended for preventing casualties. The 2 findings coexisted in my personnel file, a permanent record of that September day when everything went wrong and somehow turned out right. I still patrol the southern trails. I still do my check-ins every hour. And sometimes, when I pass that junction where the Cathedral Wall Trail meets the old mining road, I stop and look northeast toward where that mine entrance, say, sits hidden in the formations. They sealed it properly after the incident. Concrete and steel, no chance of anyone wandering in accidentally. The rare earth deposits Carl found remain there, locked in the rock, too expensive and complicated to extract legally. Maybe someday, when technology improves or demand increases, someone will open a legitimate mining operation. Or maybe it'll all just stay buried, another secret the Badlands keeps. But I remember. I remember Nora's broken radio and the torn map. I remember Carl's desperate eyes and David's blood on the stone floor. I remember the weight of that gun in my hand and the sound of Carl's voice breaking when he said, "Everything's over." Most of all, I remember the silence, that terrible radio silence that started everything. And I know that if it happens again, if I ever hear that absence where there should be a voice, I'll do the same thing. I'll go find out what's wrong, because that's what answering the call means. Even when the radio goes silent.